Hello, my loves. Just a brief disclaimer before we go into the commentary on the documentary Tiger King. Something has become apparent since we recorded this podcast, which is slightly annoying and more than a little distressing, to be honest. Whilst the documentary has many great qualities that we praise, something that it doesn't take, it bafflingly fails to take into account, is one of the zookeepers, specifically the one who gets their arm torn off by one of the tigers, is portrayed in a manner that is absolutely contradictory to their preferred pronouns, their gender identity, and the name they prefer. Saf is consistently referred to throughout the documentary by female pronouns and by their dead name, which is a little annoying, quite frankly. The documentarian certainly should have done better about that. Unfortunately, we those of us who recorded this podcast were unaware that Saf identifies as a male and not as a female lesbian. So there may be some instances where their preferred gender pronouns are not respected. Apologies for that. We were unaware when when this was recorded. My hope is that the documentarians themselves will redress that somehow, maybe when they come to revisit the material or something to that effect, because it is a significant thing. They really should be a little bit more aware of that kind of thing. But apart from that, I hope you enjoy the commentary, and we will see you soon. Bye bye. But yeah, I mean, what we're discussing today has actually it sent me on a run of documentaries.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I mean, I love documentaries anyway. I have a real appreciation for sort of the narrative form of the documentary,
Yeah.
um, as misunderstood as it is.
Yeah, and I think that's something we're going to talk about as we get into this, because this is, I mean, one of the things I was struck by this particular show was this is one of the most, because I'm with you. I watch quite a lot of documentaries. I actually find them very inspirational. I
Mhm.
find a lot of, at least as much, probably more of my writing ideas come from documentaries than they do from fiction. To be honest, I
Yeah,
find
and I can certainly understand that. I mean, not only are documentaries their own very particular narrative format, but there is a tendency for documentaries to explore things that are stranger than fiction.
well, this is exactly it. Yeah, I think the characters you meet in documentaries can be so incredible. They kind of remind you. I think a good documentary, one of the things a good documentary can do is remind you of the sheer scale and scope of the human experience and the human
Right.
creature and our almost limitless malleability and I think that I mean this one certainly that's one of the things
Oh,
that this one does very well, I think.
I,
But it's
I,
also just on a I know, but also I have to say, what I was driving at was on the technical level. What I think is so impressive about this is the storytelling, the way
yeah,
the story develops episode to episode. In this documentary, there are a lot of people who write drama who could learn an awful
right.
lot about the structure, how to structure a
Yeah.
narrative from watching this series. It is phenomenally well put together.
I was just on a technical level. I was blown away by this.
Yep.
It's structured in a similar way, funnily enough, as Better Call Saul. You know, the
Oh,
spin-off
interesting.
drama of
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Breaking Bad. It's the narrative is very very similar. You have these larger than life characters who do very extreme and unusual things, but it slowly builds. It drip feeds you details and then leaves you with cliffhangers. Basically, it leaves you wanting more at the end of every episode. It's given you just enough of the
yeah,
strangeness, of the narrative hooks, of the absurdity of the situation. And then it also does that wonderful thing of very, very gradual escalation, where
yes,
it gives you it starts out okay, so you have this strange situation where you have people who are obsessed with big cats, and maybe they're not the best people to be taking care of these animals. Fair enough, fine. That's bad enough in and of itself. And then it gets into the personalities, then it gets into the relationships, then it gets into the wider absurdities that develop from that, and it just keeps going. It
yeah,
keeps going. I find with these kinds of documentaries, and just with these kinds of television shows, there comes a point where they hit a wall. They hit this upper wall where it's like, okay, it cannot possibly get any weirder than this. It has to stop. There has to be some sort of apex, and often there isn't. It keeps going. It breaks. It kind of punches through, and the emotional reaction of the audience is amazing. To sit and experience that is amazing, because you have this almost like traumatic experience to what you're watching, where you're like, I can't. No, this is insane. I found myself watching this, pausing it, and going and looking up on the internet. Is this false? Is this like a Blair Witch Project narrative exercise? You know?
Yeah, no, it's almost dialectical in its approach to storytelling. It really is. It just slowly gives you a peeling of the onion a little bit at a time, as much as you can take for this episode, and then at the very end, it's like, well, here's the thing that we're going to be dealing with next.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a good rock and roll album showing you what the next album is going to be with its final track. I love that about it. And I did that same thing as well. I didn't believe it could possibly be true. I had to double check that this wasn't some kind of elaborate piss take, but if it had been, it would have been the greatest narrative of the 21st century so far. It just happened.
Well, there is a sort of Tommy Wiseau quality about it, isn't there? Like, the characters involved are so extreme. They're so, in many respects, they're so caricature, they're so cartoonish, that they seem impossible. They seem like something created rather than actual.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's worth bearing in mind on that particular point, of course, that part of the reason for that is because almost all of them, I think, certainly all of the major players are performers.
Oh yeah.
You know, they're playing to the camera. They're playing, and they're. I mean, in the personas, especially of the big cat owners, Joe Exotic and was it Bhagavan? You know, those two characters are, you know, explicit performers. They're performing every day in front of live audiences, and also in Joe's case, he's performing to camera every day. You know, he sees himself as a star of his own movie very much. So that kind of exacerbates the sense of these people as larger than life characters, because that's what they're projecting. What I found fascinating actually was you have the immediate impact in episode 1 of that projection, and then as you know, there's James described the metaphor of the peeling of the layers of the onion. It's the peeling of the layers of the personalities as you discovered more facts about these people, as you discovered more things about what they'd done, and the gap between persona and the reality, and the way they changed when the camera was on them versus when it was off them. And I mean, with Joe, I think that was kind of almost predictable that was how it was going to go. For me, it was the revelations about Bhagavan and the way that he was effectively. I mean, you know, this is something maybe we're going to want to talk about a bit more, but I mean, I perceived his behavior as getting very, very close to grooming in terms of the way he was bringing in very young women into that group.
Oh, it was like a cult, wasn't it? I mean, that's the impression it creates. There is cultish behavior. There's almost like a cultish psychology going on here. And I could have even bought it as a sort of very unusual workplace culture, were it not for the fact that they were being paid. When there's that revelation, and it's framed so beautifully, where one of the employees says something like, "Oh, we were being paid, what was it, $100 a week?" And I was like, what? This isn't even a job then.
And they're working like 18-hour days.
Right. Yeah. This isn't even a job. This is not a real job. If you were being paid by the hour, then I could almost buy it. But no, this is very much a cult. And Joe himself, I'm very wary of internet psychology and whatnot, but I have to study things like narcissism for my job, because I work in social support. I have to study things like narcissism, and narcissists are necessarily attracted to the kind of people I support and represent. He ticks so many boxes in terms of the way he's framed within the documentary, the characteristics that he demonstrates himself. It's unbelievable. He is very much a cult leader. There is a Jim Jones quality to him.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting how with both of them, their recruitment methods. So, Bhagavan, as I said, kind of goes after, very, young women, girls / young women, and kind of, uses very much the access to the cats as a kind of wedge and a way in to their affections and also to their loyalty. Whereas Joe when it explicitly goes after people who are destitute, right?
Right,
People who are recently
right.
released from prison, who have no job prospects. I mean, there's footage at one point in one of the early episodes of him approaching someone like in a gas station or somewhere like that, and they're literally like homeless, sat on a bench. And he's like, you know, if you're willing to work, I can give you a place to live, kind of thing.
Right. It's classic. It is classic narcissistic behavior. I mean, you know, what they tend to do is want to dominate people. They don't really want a partner as such. They want someone that they can control, and of course, someone who is destitute, who is just out of prison, who has no prospects or whatever, or who is addicted. I mean, addicts are fantastic for narcissists.
Yeah.
They are sort of prime meat, you know, because of course there is a very clear and easy way of controlling addicts, and it would have been bad enough were he approaching other gay men. It would have been terrible, but
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was because I mean that was one of the. I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it? One of the things I found fascinating about the show was that for all that it did, I think, a good job of allowing the people in it to portray themselves, and gave most people got a fair crack at the whip, apart from I think Carol Baskin, which is someone we're going to need to come on to. But I think that for me, one of the few outright 100% sympathetic characters for me was John Finlay, you know, one of Joe's husbands, because he seemed to me to be someone who was just, and he seemed like a sweet guy, first of all. You know, he seemed like a genuinely kind of nice, and he just seemed someone who was utterly adrift,
right?
You know, in a world that he was totally outside of his control.
Well, there are a couple of interviews towards the end of the documentary with Finlay where things are revealed by whoever's doing the interview, and he does seem to be having a shock reation, doesn't he? He seems to go like, "What?"
Yeah.
Doesn't he say something like, "Well, that was news to me"? Yeah, he does seem to be a bit quite naive. Naive.
I think also the use of the power relations. On the one side, Joe is getting people who are freshly out of jail to work in his part because he enjoys the power in that sense, and it's also useful to his own ends of a Trump-like celebrity that he wants to try and chase down after. And from the romantic side, that's when getting heterosexual drug addicts as a method to control them is also going on. I think it explains a lot about the nature and the culture of that part. Once you realise that a lot of people were on quite heavy drugs, there's a wooziness to the behaviour, and that's when it really starts to come into play. Is when you realise, oh, hang on, things that were a little bit unclear now make a lot more sense.
Absolutely, and as you know, as bad as Joe himself comes out of this at the end, and he does. I mean, the man is a pretty terrible guy. I found my reaction to him vacillating all over the place. I don't know about you guys. Like, at particular points, I did find myself feeling terrible for him, feeling sorry for him. And then at others, you know, just utterly condemning the guy.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing about Joe is I think you're right. I think Joe's fairly clearly a narcissistic personality, and I think, it's funny. I was reflecting on this because one of the, as I think you both know, I've just finished bringing out. I was sorting out the text of My Life in Horror Volume 1, which is a collection of the first 30 essays that I did for Ginger Nuts, and one of the essays in there is about a childhood friend who, in retrospect, clearly was someone with narcissistic personality and also, as it happened, drug addiction issues.
Right.
And about the nature of my friendship with them and how it felt like a friendship, but it really wasn't.
Yeah, right.
You know, it was a very one-sided kind of thing. And I kept seeing a lot of that guy in Joe. I kept seeing a lot of that. And I felt the same very complex set of emotional responses that I felt about that guy to Joe. I did absolutely at times feel sympathy for him. I did at times feel sad for him. But at the same time, I was very conscious that, you know, all of the misery he was going through was absolutely self-inflicted.
Oh my God, as it often is for narcissists, you know.
Yeah, and he was at the same time as he was feeling like that, he was inflicting that misery and worse on the people. I mean, you know, like his grief at the loss of his other husband is absolutely real and raw and horrible, but it's like that kid would never have shot himself in the fucking head if he hadn't been off his bonds because of all the shit you were giving him, and if he hadn't been running around playing with guns like you were, fucking Wild Bill and Billy the Kid fucking part. Like, that is on you, mate.
Yeah,
that is
absolutely,
on Joe.
absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Likewise, the performance of one of his songs that he would sing over at the funeral as the grieving mother sits in front of him. He sings a song about his trouble, his hard times, getting a park set up. It's absolutely astonishing.
It is, isn't it?
Self-awareness.
That sequence was amazing. The fact that he used his husband's funeral as an excuse to sing one of his own songs at all. The fact that he was composed enough. It speaks volumes about the guy.
And for me, the cherry on the shit Sunday of that particular scene, and this is again, George, I know you and I have joked about this many times before. There's a thing about like reality can get away with stuff that a novel couldn't.
Oh yeah.
It's the fact that when he sings that song, you realise that it was someone else singing on the recordings. Yeah, because he sounds like shit.
Right.
Like he can't carry a tune in a bucket. And you realise, like, even if he wrote the songs, but he sure as shit didn't sing them on the recordings. It's not his voice because you hear him live, and he's just terrible.
Yeah, right.
And it's just like, and that's not even a metaphor, right? That's the thing that just happened in that scene. It's like, this is almost too much at this point.
This is exactly it. This is what we were talking about before. There are multiple points where the documentary, and it does it so beautifully on a narrative level, where it layers in the absolute, what you consider to be, as the audience, the extremes of absurdity that this situation can hit, and then it carries you through. It just keeps going, and it's wonderful. It is so beautiful on a narrative level because, of course, it leaves you out here on this side of the screen just adrift. You cannot. You're in this incredulous reaction and this very this malleable headspace where it can just keep pouring this absurdity in, and you'll take it. You'll just keep taking it. It's a brilliant narrative exercise. I am just in awe of this documentary.
Yes, and I think the flip side of what you just said for me, or maybe not the flip side, but what makes that work is the pacing is just exquisite. Mm-hmm. Because you push that even slightly too hard, and it would become unwatchable quite quickly.
Yeah.
If you run it too slowly, you actually might give people too much time to think, which you also like. It's really, really, really impressive. I mean, again, genuinely, I know I said it, but I hope that serious writers of drama will study this. Yeah. Serious writers of TV drama will study this documentary, because I think as an exercise in narrative pacing and in handling revelation, I can't think of anything that's done this as well in recent years. Anything like as well.
Just on a purely personal level, it interfered with my routines. I couldn't leave it alone. It is very much, it is the scab you can't leave alone, isn't it? It's car crash television. There is a prurient element to it, obviously. There is even as much as I hesitate to say it, there is a freak show element to it too, and the documentary is aware of that. It is a case of there but for the grace of God go I. I think that's quite uncomfortable, actually, that element of it. I think there is. I mean, there are. It is, again. We'll come to Carol, I know, but I think there are aspects of this documentary that are very morally questionable indeed. Oh yeah, I mean, it has very particular narrative agendas. It doesn't have like personal biases. It doesn't really have like political biases or anything to that effect, none that are overt anyway, but it does want to tell you a very particular story, and the dynamic that it draws is just this cauldron, this seething cauldron of extreme personalities that seem impossible in isolation and seem even more impossible in terms of their relation to one another.
Even the people who are ostensibly observers in the narrative, such as the reality TV show man who went down there thinking he had absolute gold dust, he's absolutely insane in and of his own terms. Right. He's a compelling character. He's somewhere between Sam Spade and Dan Rather, and I want to watch the documentary about that guy's life. Right. It's an individual place. I want to see, well, let's spend 7 hours on where this person's coming from, but the nature of the kind of black hole of cult-like charisma leads them is you go into that place thinking you can sell something to True TV, and you find yourself with a terrible fire of dead alligators.
Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah. Rick Kirkman, that guy. He was because I think he's the first person you meet on camera. I think he's the opening of the first documentary as a Rick Kirkman interview. He was fascinating. He felt like he'd stepped out of the pages, as you say, of a noir novel, maybe,
right.
Yeah, maybe a Jim Thompson, like a bit character Jim Thompson novel. The cigarettes and the hat and that voice, you know, that gravelly voice, the face made out of leather, you know, like he was almost I don't know, like a stunt double for you know, one of the Rolling Stones or something. I don't know.
This is exactly it. This is when during the first few episodes, the introduction of these characters, and it's not just the way they're framed by the documentary, although that is part of it. It's the way they introduce themselves, the way they comport themselves. These people are impossible. You know. Well,
again, that's what I love about John Finlay, because he's just sat there, bare-chested, stiff forearms, tattoos. Big smile, the missing teeth, you know, and I think he's quite a handsome man.
Oh, absolutely. You know, beyond the obvious effect that meth addiction has had upon him. He's a very attractive guy. I can definitely see why someone like Joe Exotic would perk up.
But I also love the fact that that's how he chooses to self-present. What he knows is a documentary. It's just like, I'm just going to sit here bare-chested for several hours.
Yeah, right.
Wonderful.
I mean,
there's also, I think they've got the opportunity rather to self-present within this. The documentary filmmakers are taking them as they come, and you see the danger of trying to make them fit into preconceived narratives in the tiny little part of the would-be reality show that we see survive, where Joe Exotic stands on a throne and says, "I'm a mulleted gay polygamist," and he's absolutely burlesquing himself, caricaturing himself in his quest for fame, and that caricature is so much less interesting than the reality.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and it's fascinating. I mean, you know, to come back to Kirkman as a character, one of the things, I mean, you're dead on, James. He's absolutely as amoral as anyone in this documentary, because he goes into a place where he becomes aware of, you know, huge levels of human suffering, huge levels of animal suffering, abuse of both kinds, you know, serious drug abuse that's causing, you know, psychological problems. And all he's thinking is, I'm going to get a great documentary out of this. I'm going to make a fortune. He's just exploitative as I can. This is my. He says that, doesn't he? That was my retirement fund going up in smoke. You know, never mind the alligators that died. Never mind the fact that, you know, Joe Exotic, the guy he works for, is almost certainly an arsonist. You know, never mind any of that. That doesn't even, you know, someone could have been killed. None of that bothers him at all. No. That's my retirement fund.
Well, again, this is it is that, it's what you said. It's a black hole of narcissism. The whole show, isn't it? It is just this bizarre abyss where people who clearly have some degree of personality disorder have come together and are operating in this weird, wonderful, horrific interplay of paranoia and one-upmanship and control and violence, and it feels so unreal. I mean, that for me, that's going to be what I take away most profoundly from this. It doesn't feel like reality. It doesn't present even like a documentary. It feels like a drama.
Yeah, and also I think in some ways, weirdly, it feels like a soap opera, particularly. In the sense that it's constantly generating, self-generating, you know, conflict artificially. Because one of the things I think sometimes one of the things that separates soap opera from real life, it's not, I mean, soap opera, most of the stuff that happens in soap operas does happen in real life. Most of it's grounded in some kind of reality. It just doesn't happen to the same 24 people every 6 months, right? That's where it's unreal.
That's it, and it's not as clean.
Pace.
It's not as clean. I mean, soap operas and dramatizations tend to present actual human drama, but in a very clean-cut way, so everyone knows what to say and at what time and whatnot. Whereas, because this is a documentary, it actually has a certain benefit in that regard, because it's not clean. It's not. You get to see the dirt and the filth and how ragged edged these actual dramas are.
Right, but I mean, the thing that separates, I think, soap opera and TV drama from reality as much as anything else is the pace of incident, I guess is what I'm saying. I mean, West Wing's another great example where it's like most of the individual things that happen in the part of the presidency of the West Wing have happened in individual presidencies. They just didn't all happen in the same one, right?
Right.
There wasn't an assassination attempt and several wars and, you know, and attempting to solve Israel-Palestine and blah, blah, blah. You know, like they didn't all happen in the same sort of 5-6 year period. But that's the interesting thing about this, isn't it? Is that the reason this works is this was shot over 5 years, right? So it is actually 5 years worth of incident condensed down to 7 hours of television.
Even within that, I mean, even within like that, those 5 years, the sheer amount and excess of stuff that happens is unbelievable, isn't it?
Actually, if we were to film you for 5 years, we would not end up with 7 hours of decent documentary from it.
It would be phenomenally dull.
No offense taken, James.
No, I know, none whatsoever. It would be phenomenally dull.
Fucking hope not, because I could do without that 5 year period.
Unless you're terribly entertained by someone petting their cat and eating chocolate, then you know, you're not going to find much. But
no, it's not going to be. But the other thing I think is that it's interesting, isn't it? The bit player characters, most of the principal leads, I think, were irredeemably awful people. Jeff Lowe came as a psychopath. James Garrett's awful. Alan Glover scared the shit out of me. I don't know about you guys.
Yes, there are.
Get that man behind bars.
Right,
do you know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not in favour of prison, but
there are
I'm
certain.
willing to make an exception.
There are definitely certain personalities that are presented here who are they're not just narcissists. They're like several steps up. There are some probably pure psychopaths here. You know,
Absolutely.
there are people who are genuinely dangerous and have done things.
Yep. Well, this is it. Yeah, I mean, his known. Never mind the speculation of what he did or didn't do in the course of the documentary. His known criminal background is pretty terrifying.
Right.
But the two characters that I did find myself coming back to, in addition to John Finlay, who I, as I say, had a real soft spot for actually by the end, were the two animal keepers. So Kelsey Safri, who lost a fucking hand.
Right.
Was back to work within the week, and the other one was Eric Cowie, the guy who looked like he was sort of got kicked out of Nickelback. You know,
I was looking at him and thinking that it's sort of Shaggy from Scooby Doo. It's got that quality about it.
But he seemed like just such a. To me, he came across as a genuine stoic. You know, he just got on with it. You know, like he cared about the cats and he wanted the park to keep going, and he was just like, it was like Boxer in Animal Farm. You know, he just kept going.
Well, there was a wonderful moment in the documentary towards the end after Joe has been arrested, and he's testifying at Joe's trial, I believe, and he's being interviewed by the press outside the courthouse, and he does have this moment where he seems to be on the edge. He seems to be on the edge of breaking, where he talks about how what he wanted was to take care of the cats and to keep doing his job, and that was pretty much it. I get the impression of him as someone maybe outside of the culture that Joe was trying to draw around the zoo.
Yeah, or maybe just had his own reasons for being there, right? I mean, one of the things that I found fascinating at the core of the show was that there is clearly, I mean, irrespective of the meth side of things, there is clearly something for some personalities or some people. There's something addictive about being around these animals, right? I mean, did you guys get that as well? Yeah.
The animals are absolutely the engine on which all of these personality disorders run on, and everyone is getting something out of the situation. Even people who are being used are using in this case. You mentioned the poor young lady who lost her arm. She's one of the relatively likeable characters in there. There's also the guy who worked in Target, who must have come across as fairly intelligent to Joe, who became his campaign manager.
Right.
He wanted to, you know, if someone offered me the chance to be their campaign manager, I would absolutely go and do it, because I would have fun doing it, even if it was a horrific, exotic type. But yeah, everyone's getting an opportunity to live out their mad dreams, whether it is to run a political campaign or be that close to a tiger.
He
Right.
actually had, I think, my favourite line in the entire documentary, which is when he looked to the camera and said, I mean, you know, I'm a libertarian, so technically, fuck the FBI. Which I thought was just like one of the funny, and the way he delivered it was just, I didn't stop laughing for about a minute. I thought it was I just felt like, that is libertarian philosophy, just totally summed up in it. And I mean, I'd say in philosophy, inverted commas.
You're right,
I mean,
right.
it exposes for me the entire absurdity. Like, technically, fuck the FBI.
Yeah, but
because actually,
yeah, when things actually come to extremists, actually,
yeah, right.
it all just falls apart, doesn't it? It all just falls
so
apart.
Funny.
And
So fun.
it's the notion. I mean, just the very notion of Joe Exotic running for governor. It is one of those moments, isn't it, in the documentary where you're like, I think it is when it first comes up, when the notion first comes up, it is at the end of an episode, so it leaves you with that wonderful silence as the credits come up, and you're like, what?
Really?
Okay.
But look, hey, when it comes to the governor race, he got 20% of the vote, damn near it. Damn near 1 in 5 Oklahomians thought, that's my guy.
Wow.
You know?
Wow. And in a way, I mean, it's one of those moments of ambivalence for me where I'm like, you know what? The guy has got balls bigger than those tigers, doesn't he? You know, it's like, wow. Either that, or it's just total lack of self-awareness. It is just total lack of self-awareness.
I tell you what it makes me think of. There's a character in one of King's less good novellas called The Langoliers, and there's a character in that, a businessman who's, I think, is a narcissistic personality, and he has basically he's run his business into the ground, and it's about to blow up when the story starts. So he's right on the ragged edge. So in fact, he's just kind of gone over the cliff. And the metaphor that King uses, I've never forgotten it to describe it. This is why even Bad King's good, because he does stuff like this. He described it as like there are these fish that are designed to live at certain pressures underwater, and if they rise too far, they just explode. And some of those fish, for some reason, just do it. They just decide to go up, and there's no real reason why. They just do.
It's a
and then
PC
they
in suicide.
It's like,
yeah.
And he's like, and he says like that's a personality. There's a you know, and he's talking about it in the context, and that's what I kept coming back to with Joe. He felt to me like, and again, isn't that an archetype of like noir fiction? I think about like there are so many like Jim Thompson, James Elroy type characters who are exactly like that. They just can't.
They can't leave it alone, can they?
No, they can't. They've just got to keep pushing it.
They're attracted to danger, aren't they? They're attracted to danger in the same way they're attracted to power. Yeah. It's almost like they're testing themselves, isn't it? It's like, can I cope in this situation that I've set up, where there are so many lies and deceits and paranoid conspiracy theories, where I've set up so many enmities? Can I somehow unpick all of this? And does that demonstrate who I am?
And inevitably, those characters are undone by a larger predator, like a Jeff Lowe, who comes in and just says, I can exploit this, this, and this, and you'll soon be unnecessary. And they're the suitcase full of money types that you can see disappearing over the hill the next day.
That's the thing, isn't it? Joe Exotic is kind of a small fish in this regard. He's a sort of small N narcissist, isn't he? In the sense that any of those larger predators would have seen him coming a mile away.
Yeah, I mean, his weaknesses are the things that make him the most human and the things that make him endearing. Those are exactly the same qualities that make his self-destruction and self-immolation inevitable. Yeah. Because the true sociopaths don't have those weaknesses.
Right, and they know, don't they? I mean, when they're interviewed, a lot of them, those who were talking up Joe Exotic initially before he went behind bars, afterwards say, oh, he was a moron.
Yeah.
He was an imbecile. We saw him coming. We knew that he was going to self-implode, you know? I
mean, Jeff Lowe's an absolutely... Because he's only in 4 of the episodes, so Jeff Lowe doesn't even appear until halfway through the documentary. And I mean, the thing about Lowe was, what I found interesting about him was, there's this whole... again, I know we've riffed on this before. One of my issues with, like, ideological issues with the characterization of Hannibal is the notion that people who are that level sociopathic are also that charismatic and interesting and crucially that good at hiding in plain sight. Because Jeff Lowe, within about 2 minutes, you're like, you are really bad news, my friend. You are a horrible human being, and I don't want to be. And like, bear in mind, he's been given the same treatment that everybody else has been given. He's allowed to speak in his own words. He's self-presenting. He's presenting, and that's the image he wants us to see.
Yeah.
You know, what we get in that documentary.
But he's very clever, isn't he? I mean, the way he presents it is such that he doesn't in any way incriminate himself. He doesn't in any way threaten. He just comes off as potentially threatening, you know?
There's that winking from him.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we all know I've done terrible things,
Yeah.
but let's see you try and prove those terrible things. Even
Right.
now, with this expensive documentary that's going to stream all over the world, I'm
Right.
confident enough in my shield that you're going to get past this.
Ah.
But you and me know.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, talking of narcissism. Like,
It's like it's the kind of person whereby you're very glad that there's a screen and distance between you and them, yeah?
yeah, I don't want that guy to know where I live.
No, I don't want that kind of person to know I exist, ideally.
And the other guy that I found absolutely fascinating was the character whom allegedly Scarface was modelled on, right?
Right.
Who came across much more likeable than Jeff Lowe, I've got to say. You know, like, I could imagine under certain circumstances having a beer with that guy and it may be being alright, you know?
Right.
Like,
yeah, and that's the danger, isn't it? That is the danger. I mean, these kinds of personalities, there is a tendency for them to be charming. I mean, there's a reason why Joe Exotic, as extreme as he could be and as bizarre as he could be, had this circle of people around him who were so devoted that they could lose an arm, you know, and come back to work.
Well, and also just the general public. You know, he clearly had a lot of affection in that part of the country. You know, there clearly were people who felt he was this larger-than-life character, just enjoyed. Because that's the other thing that we've got to remember. There were thousands and thousands of people visiting this park every single year. You see that in the footage, and that's, you know, we could argue they should have known better, but I mean, whatever. But there was clearly, and as I say, he got 17% of the vote in the election, so a lot of people in the state had a lot of affection for this guy, and you can kind of see why, because he leans into his own absurdity. Yeah, he leans into that rodeo clown image, and that does feel less overtly kind of menacing as actually all of the other big cat owners, I think, seemed more overtly kind of menacing than Joe did. You know, as I say, I mean, Bhagavan really bothered me. I really, really, really didn't like it, and I had a visceral reaction to him from the beginning, even before I found out about how he was, you know, effectively leveraging the cats to set up this kind of, you know, this. I mean, I'm going to use the word grooming again. I don't know. Hopefully, I won't get sued. But you know, I mean, that's what it looked like to me. In my opinion, that was a grooming operation.
Absolutely,
you know?
yeah. I mean, it's exactly, as we've already mentioned, it's exactly the same techniques that cults use. It's exactly the same techniques. And
I found him really creepy. And the other guy who was, you know, the guy who ended up later on going into business with Jeff Lowe and then dropping out again, and you know, I can't remember, was it John Rank, was it? Was he the other guy who was just like, he just spent the entire time like laughing at both of them, you know? But I don't know, man. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think, I mean, objectively, I don't think Joe was necessarily any less dangerous than those other characters.
Potentially,
actually.
no. I mean, as we've seen. I mean, there was the attempt on Carol Baskin's life, which was very real, and I have no doubt that in a fit of pique, he would have done it himself. Eventually, he would have attempted it.
It's amazing the creation of Nemesis in this very small world, and it's been pointed out that everyone in the documentary was guilty of many of the same things again and again, but for one to believe so strongly that the side of morals are on their side in Carol Baskin's, I'm certain she believes that she's doing nothing but good in the world. And there's many of her supporters who'd say the same, despite her sanctuary being not much better than the likes of Joe Exotic or Doc Annals, who, by the way, reminds me of no one so much as Penn Jillette, with no judgment on either man for that.
You know, yeah, absolutely. I had that in my head quite a lot. And it was like, this is a mirror darkly Penn Jillette, because I have an affection for Penn Jillette.
Yeah, I like him inspire myself.
Yeah, exactly right. And it was just like, Doc Adler was just like,
but they created enemies. It was a world of heroes and villains, you know, it was black and white, so they both seen it. And the mountain obsession for Joe Exotic to be continually talking about, this is us doing this to Carol, every day on his YouTube show. And again, one of the things I loved about it was the choice to film a lot of his crimes, like him being in the lawyer's office. Like, yeah, we need to make sure this thing burns down. And he had a camera with him while there. I love it when people film their crimes and their planned crimes.
Absolutely wonderful. Yeah. It's one of those elements that makes me. It's still, even though I know that's legitimate footage, it makes me question its validity in my head. It's sort of like this cannot be real. This cannot be real.
Isn't it?
It is. It's too perfect. It's too absurd.
Look, it's a proud American tradition going back at least as far as Richard Nixon. Okay, let's not.
Right. Yes. Yes. And I suppose in a universe of infinite probability, there must be some point in history where these absurdities all coalesce together. It must happen somewhere. It's just the fact that it's happened in my lifetime that I find so strange.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, what a time to live, huh? What a time to be alive.
Right.
It was shortly after Edison ripped off the technology with which to record sound that people immediately started recording their crimes. It's inside human beings.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It so is, yeah, to incriminate ourselves and to somehow to promulgate everything about ourselves, the most intimate, the most terrible.
Don't you find that oddly comforting, though?
In its own strange way, yes, because it kind of neuters us, doesn't it?
Yeah. I also think, like, if they were just a little brighter, right? They do what we do, be fiction writers, and then no one can touch you for it.
Yeah, right. But I get it all
difficult.
Out. It's not real. Yeah.
Exactly.
I don't live it.
I just made it up, man.
Right. I don't live it. I create it. I imagine it. Yeah. Oh my God! But that structure of paranoia around Joe Exotic and the escalating mythology that both he and Carol Baskin built up around themselves is just amazing. In and of itself alone, that would have been incredible. Without murder plots, without the animal abuse, without everything else, that alone would have been a narrative you could have flown a documentary on.
Well, it's a kind of scorpion dance, isn't it? Or it feels that way. It's like they are, I mean, as you say, Nemesis, the mortal enemies, they're locked to, like, I mean, Carol Baskin spends the entire 7 episodes attempting and eventually, I think, succeeding in financially destroying Joe Exotic. And it's her explicit goal from the beginning. There's no hiding it.
Right.
In that sense, it is a death dance. One of them's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that it's fairly clear fairly early on that Joe's not going to win this one in the courts. Right. I mean, he just isn't. And he probably doesn't deserve to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it's really difficult, actually. This is one where my natural prejudices come up against. So, like, because part of me is very angry about the fact that the person with the most money is going to win, because that seems to me to typify a structural problem with our societies, right? And it genuinely does. Like, that gets me on a gut level. I get very, very angry about that. However, in this particular case, yes, Carol does have more money than Joe, but I think on balance, she's probably in the right in the sense that Joe is mistreating animals and his zoo should be shut down for
absolutely.
welfare.
And, by the same token, the reason Joe doesn't have any money to defend himself, because he's had access to enormous amounts of money throughout the course of this documentary from one donor or another, is because he is so terrible with it.
Well, he decided he wanted to run for president. I understand that's quite expensive. I'm no expert, but apparently.
Yeah, apparently so. Apparently that can fetch you quite a bit. Yeah.
I mean, don't you love the bit where I think it is this campaign manager, or it might have been Jeff Lowe, or someone says, you know what? I think it was Jeff Lowe saying, and he ran for president, and I remember him saying to me at one point, I really think I've got a chance. I really think I've got a chance. He never had a chance.
Yeah.
I'm going to step away, gentlemen. You carry on.
Yes, of course. I do. I mean, there is a part of me that wants to have the whole Mandela effect, and I want to slip into the reality where that succeeded.
Well, look, he kind of did, right? I mean, Trump won, but...
Yeah.
I mean, same personality type.
Yeah, absolutely. And in many respects, they would have run in very much the same way. It's this sort of strength of personality rather than integrity of principle. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is everything.
And I'll tell you what is interesting to me is that there is this this strain of in the American tradition that I find absolutely fascinating, where someone like, because it's, I mean, you know, Oklahoma is the deep South, and Oklahoma's got a lot of structural issues around, you know, racism, around homophobia, around all of that kind of stuff, and some very, you know, there are still strong traditions of. There's strong traditions of civil rights as well. It's always two stories. You got. I don't want to generalize, but there are strong strains and traditions of behaviour that you and I would consider to be very kind of retrograde, very kind of unpleasant. You know, and there is something fascinating for me knowing that. For example, there will have been a sizable number of Republican voters who would have voted for Joe Exotic.
For Joe Exotic, yeah.
In that governor race, because almost everyone in Oklahoma's Republican.
Right.
So if you score 1 in 5 votes, that's not the Democrats. That's going to be, and it's because of that presentation of I am a gun-toting, redneck, mullet-wearing, gay, polygamous son of a bitch. It's that there's something about that particular. It's the outlaw presentation.
Yeah.
There's something about the figure of the outlaw that is absolutely totemic in the American psyche, and especially in the Southern American psyche.
And Joe Exotic, the caricature of Joe Exotic that he presented to these people was an outlaw in every respect, wasn't it? I mean, okay, he had this aspect of him, like the gay aspect or the polygamous aspect that was against prescribed morals or against morals that one would associate with republicanism, perhaps.
Yeah.
But in and of itself, that sort of, I imagine that could have become a strength, you know?
But that's the thing. The genius of it was because he rolled that in with this absolutely rabid individualism. Right. It became part of the package.
And it's the fact that he called it libertarianism as well. And I get the impression that Joe Exotic probably wouldn't have been able to define libertarianism if you gave him a dictionary, you know?
No, but sure. But one of the memes you see on Facebook a lot is I'm a libertarian, and what that means is I want to have my pistol strapped to my side while I smoke weed at my best friend's gay wedding. That's
right. Gay bar mitzvah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's like, and that's the kind of, that's the. I mean, I always think of that as like the fluffy kind of ideal. And it's like, but what do you want to do about taxes? What do you want to do about public services? What do you want to do about public health? What do you want to do? Oh, right, yeah.
There's the fluff. Where's the crunch? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's let Ronald McDonald run the fucking world. I'm sure that'll be perfect.
Right.
Go. So, like, it's. But that's the, that, and I think actually when I say that, that's kind of the self-image. That's the idealized self-image of a lot of libertarians.
Yeah.
Is that thing about like, no, we just want freedom. We just want everyone to be free, and we're not racist and we're not homophobic, and we believe that people should just be free to do what they want. But the trouble is, they also believe that people should be free to, refuse service to people they don't like for
and to put chemicals in whatever drinks they serve and so on and so forth. That's the upshot, isn't it?
I think there's a moral vacuum at the heart of libertarianism.
Yeah. I think there is. But my core problem with libertarianism is foundational. So it is it's the notion that I've lost my train of thought. Fuck, I had something and it's gone! It's gone! Oh, listeners, I'm so sorry. I was going to just settle for the fact that it was going to be very profound and you were going to nod your heads and agree and stroke your beards and whatnot. Yeah, just settle for that. But yeah, it just flew from my mind like a
But it is, I mean, but to get back to Joe and that, I love how, because I think that was Joe's self-image. And of course then you see the thing about that is that justifies all of his appalling behaviour with the animals.
Yeah.
Because at that point he's not committing acts of animal cruelty. What he's doing is defying federal overreach. What he's doing is being an outlaw. What he's doing is denying the right of the government to tell him what to do.
That's principally it, but you always get the impression when he's standing on his pulpit pontificating, it's almost prescribed, isn't it? It's something that he's heard other people saying and has adopted into his own confection of personality. What I find about Joe Exotic is that there is this kind of vacuum at the heart of him.
Yeah.
There isn't any reality to him, beyond paranoia. There really isn't anything else to him. There's paranoia, there's spite, there's a desire for control, and there's a lot of pain. There's an incredible amount of trauma.
Yeah,
There's something it's never focused on, but there's something he says very early on in the documentary where he's talking about, being a gay guy in this culture. And the documentary kind of skims over it, but he talks about how he's kicked out of his house when he was such and such an age, how his dad would beat him and whatnot. And there is a part of me that when you view the guy in this holistic way, when you're given this documentary essentially, which allows you to see the beginning and the end of Joe Exotic, you can see where it comes from. Narcissists are created, they're not born. There's no genetic component like there is in psychopathy, for example. They're created, not born. You can be made into a narcissist by all manner of things. It's a reaction to external trauma and stimuli, basically. And given his background, given the fact that he is this self-identified gay man in this culture, I can see why he would have developed into the man that he became. And in that regard, there is a kind of, victims are we all quality about it.
Definitely. And the flamboyance is 100% a defense mechanism, right? And that's a defense mechanism that millions and millions of children develop, whatever their background. If they have something in their, if they have something in their physical presentation or social presentation that singles them out in school and leads them to being vulnerable, one of the defense mechanisms that can often be developed amongst those children is a kind of overt flamboyance and clowning.
Absolutely.
There's no shortage of stand-up comedians who'll talk about learning that if they could get the bully to laugh at school that they would get the shit kicked out of them. Like, this is fundamental stuff, and hashtag not all stand-up comedians, whatever, but I'm just saying, like, it's common enough to be kind of understood as a normal thing. And I think, again, the fact that he found a way, in a way I guess quite cleverly, to link his sexuality with a wider outlaw persona, he found a way of making what he was doing socially acceptable by building it into part of a larger persona that was an archetype that was looked on with approval by that kind of a society. Right. I mean, I think the fact that he was white probably helped.
Yes. Could you imagine if he wasn't?
Well, I mean, one of the things I remember talking about, so at one point I was talking about doing a road trip through the southern states, which I never really did. I've been to Alabama, and I've been to Birmingham, Alabama, and I've been to Atlanta, Georgia. I've been, so I have been to the South a little. But at one point, I was sort of thinking about I'd love to do a proper Southern road trip and take it all in. And I remember talking about it with an American friend and saying, "Mate, I'm actually a little bit nervous." A friend from the South saying, "I'm a little bit nervous about it. I wonder if I'm going back 10 years now." But I remember him saying, "No, you'll be fine because you're white." He said, "Just wear Leonard Skinner t-shirts. You'll be fine with your long hair and your beard. Don't worry about it. Just wear, like, if you're wearing a Leonard Skinner about truckers t-shirts, you will fit right in.
No one will even bat an eyelid at you.
No, exactly. And then when they hear your accent, they'll be charmed, and you'll be fine. Like,
right. I mean, again, that's right. There's that element too. I mean, you can actually be charming just by virtue of your accent. Yeah.
Yeah. That's absolutely. But the eye opener for me was like, because there was me thinking like I look like someone who will get the shit kicked out of them, but it's like, no, you don't, because you fit into an acceptable subculture in the South that exists. And people just assume that's you, and then you're okay again. And I think, again, when you look at Joe's image, I mean, the mullet then actually becomes key, right? That's an absolutely key element of what he's doing, what he's presenting there. Because he's like, I'm a redneck and I'm proud of it. And fuck you, right? And that's going to win him over with precisely the base of people who might normally think, let's go beat up the queer guy, right? Right, yeah. But they're going to say, oh, no, Joe's all right.
But Joe is kind of the approbated queer, isn't he? Which is something that comes up quite a lot, actually. Just in general culture, there have always been almost. I mean, I hesitate to use the term, but it's something that does come up in like queer culture a lot. There's the pet queer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I imagine Joe very much would have been.
Yeah, I think so. Weirdly, because it doesn't, overtly when you think about the kind of gun-toting outlaw son of a bitch thing, it doesn't feel that way. But on a deeper level, of course, what he's doing actually by making himself, quote-unquote dangerous, is he's actually making himself safe.
Right, that's it. That's the irony, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
He presents as though he's...
Yeah.
Yeah, he presents as though he's doing something that's rebellious and that's extreme and that's bizarre and that's actually setting him apart from culture, when actually what he's doing is worming his way in.
Right, and to be fair, for coastal liberals, he probably did look exotic, crazy. Well, they probably were freaked out by him, right?
Yeah, right.
Straight or queer, they were probably like, "Wow, what have you come as?"
Right.
But in the culture of Oklahoma, yeah, absolutely.
And also, he lends
Yes.
himself novelty, doesn't he, by doing that? In a number of cultures, and from a number of perspectives. I mean, gay guys, most sort of like, you know, if you go for the stereotype of the slightly cosmopolitan gay guy, looking at Joe Exotic would be not a chance in fucking hell. Right?
Yeah, sure.
Not a chance. And yet, I imagine if you could meet the man face to face and talk to him, I bet he's charming as hell.
Oh yeah.
I'll bet you would.
There's no question.
I imagine you would find yourself swept off your feet in what, you know, platonically or otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm sure that's right. I'm sure that, and again, that's reflected in, you know, some of the footage I was most fascinated by, and it was often presented as background footage while there was a voiceover, but it was you watch him interacting with the public in the park. It was clearly the place where he was happiest, you know.
Right.
And he just, his ability to build rapport with the people that were coming in on a daily basis was quite astonishing.
Well, they loved him, didn't they?
Really,
they loved him. I imagine there would be like generations of kids who visited that park semi-regularly who grew up with Joe Exotic in their heads as a hero figure.
Yeah, definitely, as a kind of role model, or even just as a, you know, as a kind of, as a larger than life, as a
kind of like clown, fun guy,
folk,
you know,
hero kind of thing.
Yeah, I've no doubt, and it would be very interesting actually hearing their perspectives on what went down and on this documentary, you know.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And again, it's interesting how, and that's one of the fascinating, like, that's where the kind of the Carol Baskin thing actually will have played into that for Joe locally, because there will have been the people who were attracted to that outlaw thing will very much felt like, we want to support this guy because he's an outlaw. Right. You know, Carol's coming in from outside, you know, trying to use the law to tell us how to behave. So I you know, I'm sure there will have been devotees of the park who would have been driven there by the feud, right? Who would have been like, we stand up for our outlaw against this kind of interloper, you know.
Right, and there is that element, isn't there? There's definitely that element. I mean, Carol Baskin, for whatever anybody else thinks about her, she would have had an uphill struggle because she's fighting against a business owner, if nothing else, you know? And that's a problem in American culture, certainly in Southern American culture, where you do have this pervasive sort of right-wing libertarian ethos that's very, 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 very common and is entrenched in not just in culture but in political systems. She is attacking a business, and she is attacking, from their perspective, from the assumptions of that ideology, an individual's right to conduct their business how they see fit. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly it. She's not just attacking a business; she's attacking a way of life.
Right.
She's attacking an archetype. She's attacking a deeply held, cherished piece of self-identity.
It's something.
And once you start doing that, you're fucked, man.
Right, exactly. I mean,
people lose. There's no rationality.
No,
at that point.
it's equivalent to what we have in this country with fox hunting in the country. You know, I mean, the vast majority of people, I think it's fair to say, who are against fox hunting tend to come from urban or suburban areas. You know. They tend to be of a left-wing perspective rather than a right-wing perspective. They don't tend to be country people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that's a good example of a cultural divide. I think that fox hunting is complicated by the class dimension.
Yeah.
I mean, interestingly, because I grew up in rural Devon, and even there, actually, the majority of people were opposed to fox hunting, even in the rural areas.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was the margins were narrower than they were. I mean, the cities, it was like 90% or something. Yeah. In the countryside, it was split sort of 65-35 against. So it was like a core of people who were in favour of it. But even in the country, a majority were against it. But I mean, I never saw any analysis, but I bet you that would break down on class lines, though.
Oh yeah,
I think,
no doubt.
You know,
Well, it
Because I
can't
think that
possibly not, can it?
no, right.
It can't possibly not, because the people who are on horseback who are actually physically doing it are upper class. It's as simple as that. You know,
No,
they're
absolutely.
not.
It's
That's
not
just
something
it.
that working class gets. And even because I remember we'd had debates about it at school, and even the children of farmers were like, "No, we hate the hunt
Right,
because the
right.
fuckers go wherever they want. They trash the fences. They never
Mhm.
repair it. They never pay for it. And they
Right.
just act like they can do what they want.
Right.
You know." And they, if God help us, if the fox goes into a crop field, they'll flatten it. I mean,
Yeah.
they were really angry about it.
That's
Some of those
really
kids.
interesting, actually, because then there, what you've got, as you have in the case of Carol Baskin and Joe Exotic, you have a juxtaposition between the assumed cultural narrative, or the narrative that's put about, i.e. fox hunting is necessary, that it's good for the culture, it's good for the country, it's entrenched within the culture of the country, and these suburbanites or these urbanites don't understand, blah, 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 and the reality of it.
Yeah.
You know, the brute
Absolutely.
reality, which is exactly what you've got here, you know. The brute reality is you've got people who have no authority or no legitimacy to be looking after these animals.
No, absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
the brute reality of it. And in fact, I mean, it gets. I thought initially that the man did have some affection for his cats, you know, even if it was just as artifacts of status. But clearly, that's not the case. I mean, the stuff that is revealed later, if there's anything that will turn you against Joe Exotic, which is ironic because I mean he is involved in a murder plot, but that notwithstanding. I think the thing that will turn most people against Joe Exotic is the fact that, and by the way, guys, if you are triggered by animal cruelty, which I know a lot of people are, you might want to avoid this, yeah?
Yeah, we might want to stick someone at the start,
Right.
actually.
Obviously.
In addition to the usual comprehensive spoilers warning,
Yeah.
content note for animal cruelty.
Absolutely. I'll stick one at the beginning, just in case. But yeah, you find out, of course, that he was, in his own words, euthanizing his cats when they became unprofitable, which basically meant putting a bullet in their skulls, you know?
Well, that's it. It was but they proved that he was convicted for shooting five big cats. They found the remains of 5 big cats with bullet holes in their skulls.
I think that was the turning point. To be honest, I think that's really what put him down in the end. That's what sent him down. It wasn't. But the problem with the murder plot was that it was largely abstract.
Yes, I think that's right, and I think that ultimately, it was kind of. It was kind of the classic mountain of circumstantial evidence, wasn't it? The murder plot, because there wasn't quite the smoking gun.
Never quite.
But you do look at it and think like, yeah, he blatantly.
Oh, of course he did. I mean there's so little doubt. There's so little doubt. I bet if he'd gotten the chance, he'd have done it himself. You know.
I mean, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? I wonder about that because I'm not sure. I wonder about that. I wonder if he actually had the capacity for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I think there's actually something because there is. I don't know, man. There's a kind of. I don't know if it's manipulation or cowardice, but there is certainly an element to his personality about getting other people to do things for him.
Oh,
you know
God,
what I mean?
yeah.
Like, it's really strong, and I wonder if he thought he wasn't capable of doing it, and that's because I think I agree with you in the sense that, like, if he felt like he could do it, he probably would have.
Yeah, if he could have gotten away with it without incriminating himself or whatever, then I think he would have done it.
But I wonder, I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if he had the capacity for it, which sounds weird because we know he had the capacity to shoot cats. So
right.
But still, I don't know. I just that's a kind of floating question mark. I mean, it doesn't. It's an academic discussion in one sense because it doesn't speak to his morality either way.
No.
He's still clearly. I think he's equally immoral.
Oh yeah, it would have been, even if he'd backed off, it would have been self-motivated. It would have been because he was afraid of recrimination. You know, that would have been it largely. And of course, I mean, the fact that he went on the lam and he disappeared so utterly is kind of self-incriminating in and of itself, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think he knew, didn't he? They hit the point where the walls were closing in, and it was, and you know what? It was only ever going to end. I mean, that's one of the things that I find fascinating about the whole. And again, you want to talk about narrative structure. This story's a tragedy in the sense that it feels completely inevitable how it's going to end.
Yeah, you know,
Like
don't you?
yeah,
You know.
and you kind of know going in. I mean, and maybe 5 minutes in episode 1, you have no idea how dark it's going to get.
That's
Because how
definitely
could you?
true. I had not the first clue coming into this that it was going to have. I mean, I'd seen people talking about this feud between Carol Baskin and this guy, and I thought, oh, fine, this sounds kind of intriguing. You know, I'll watch it. I'll put it on. I did not think it was going to escalate as far as it did.
No, that's it. Yeah.
I just
Yeah,
couldn't. I don't think anyone can anticipate unless you know going in. You know, I just don't think you can. I don't think you can. There's a couple of documentaries actually available on Netflix that do this, that have this exact arc, this sort of exact structure about them. There's one that's condensed. It was very popular, I believe, a couple of years ago. That's condensed. It's just like one feature length, like a movie, like an episode.
Sure.
Abducted in Plain Sight.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. I've not seen it.
Which I would say is a lot worse than this one in terms of just the human filth and tragedy of it. It's way worse because it involves just awful things. Massive caveats for that one, by the way, guys. If you do go looking for Abducted in Plain Sight, it's an amazing documentary. It's again beautifully put together, but it is traumatic. Massively traumatic, and basically every trigger you could possibly imagine is just in it. It's just there, and then some, then just more and more and more. But it has that same quality of it must stop. This arc, this curve is becoming vertical and starting to loop back on itself.
I mean, I think the other one I enjoyed, although I don't think it had quite the same curve, was Making a Murderer, which was a fantastic documentary.
Yeah,
but it didn't. I mean, but I think I think Tiger King's next level. I think a bar has been set with this one.
I think so too. I mean, as we mentioned earlier on, you kind of have to talk about the nature of documentaries, because I do feel that documentaries are misrepresented in culture. People tend to misconceive of what they are in the same way and to the same degree as people misconceive what memory is. You know.
Yeah.
You know how people seem to think that memory is like a record of things that happen, and it's not. It's just not. Psychologically, it just isn't. As a phenomena, that's not what it is. Memory is more imagination and dreams and bias and storytelling than it is anything. It's sort of self-narrativizing, self-mythologizing. Documentaries are kind of the same. They're not exactly records of what happened. They are narrative exercises. They're mythological exercises. And people who make documentaries do so because there's a story to tell, yeah?
Yeah.
And because they have particular intentions, particular biases, because they want something to be out there. And Tiger King, for me, it's the technical acumen of it that I find so impressive.
Yeah, and interestingly, and I think that that kind of neatly leads on to one of the big things I did want to talk about, because I think that I agree with you on that, and the technical acumen is of a level that I find astonishing. And I've made the comment already now about narrative, so I won't rehearse that again, but just to kind of underline that. But I do think that I find that because of that, I have some quite profound concerns about the morality of this piece of work. Actually, like I think it has some it makes some quite questionable choices morally, and I think for me those are best exemplified by the way the documentary presents Carol as a character.
Baskin, yeah. I mean, if anything, she has become at least as infamous as Joe Exotic as a result of this documentary, if not more so. I mean, the mimetic element of Carol Baskin is just everywhere. And, mea culpa, I've shared a few of them because they're really funny. They are really funny. Some of them are just hilariously funny. And don't get me wrong, from the way she comes across, I am not a Carol Baskin fan. No. But that doesn't mean that she's a murderer.
This is exactly the thing, right? This is what I wanted to get to. So, no, I'm not a Carol Baskin fan. I think there are clearly, there are question marks about the way she runs her business and the way she runs her park. There certainly are. I don't think there's question marks about the treatment of the animals, but the treatment of the volunteers, the people, that looked quite questionable to me in places. She doesn't do herself any favours in the documentary. She comes across as strange personality in any number of ways. And the documentary does everything it can to accentuate that.
Of course it does. I mean, you know, in order for her to stand up against Joe Exotic in like narrative terms, she can't just be a concerned woman, can she?
No.
She's got to be more than that. So, of course, it delves into all this stuff regarding her. I mean, you can't even say her late husband, can you? Really, because he wasn't found.
Yeah.
So, and don't get me wrong, it is intriguing. There is a mystery there, obviously, because someone went missing and never turned up again. A rich guy just went missing and never turned up again, and that is fascinating. It also delves into Carol's, like, her domestic arrangement and her relationship with her not late husband's family, which is also questionable.
Sure.
But again, there are issues because it's not necessarily germane to what's happening in the main documentary, is it?
No, and I don't think that there's anything in there that's just. It doesn't feel to me like there's anything on there that's on the same level of what is known about the other main animal camp. You know, keeper. What can be proven? I mean, the whole thing about Carol's missing husband is, you know, it's really it's difficult because on the one hand, it's like if you're making a documentary, you can't ignore that part of the story. You can't because Joe Exotic won't let you, right?
Of course, I mean it is something that he brought up again and again and again and again, isn't it? In fact, lots of them did. Lots of the big cat people brought it up again and again and again.
Well, I can't remember. It's either the end of episode 2 or the end of episode 3 where you suddenly get this montage of them saying, "Oh yeah, she's the one who probably killed her husband," and you're like, "Wait, what?" It's one of the big cliffhangers. But it just, I mean, it's very, very flimsy stuff.
It is. All the evidence that the documentary itself presents is entirely circumstantial. All you really get is speculation from people who already have access to Grind.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, she may have treated her late husband's family terribly in terms of the will. She may have done, you know, that's not entirely uncommon, is it?
No, right.
You know, and there may be some questionable morality going on there, but that gives them the axe to grind, doesn't it? It gives them the motivation for hating her and also you have to bear in mind she is the second or third wife, so of course there's already going to be tensions. You know, she's the stepmother, isn't she? She's the wicked stepmother archetype. Then, of course, you have the claims of Joe Exotic and that lot, and it seems to me that the entire big cat community were against her. So
well, they were because she went to war against them, right? I mean, and she's explicit about saying that's what she was doing. She was like, I want to put these people out of business, and her reason for doing that was because, and this is worth remembering because this gets obscured in the wider conversation, but her reason for wanting to do that was she knew they were breeding illegally and breeding in captivity. She considered to be just morally repugnant.
Right.
Now, that's very, very clear. And whether actually or not you agree with that, the law's on her side on that as well. That's the current legal position. So, you know, I don't like how much they attempted to muddy that by bringing in all this other shit. You know what I mean? And it was just... And I mean, as far as the thing with her husband, I mean, it's clear that her marriage to her husband wasn't particularly happy as well, right? Okay. But that, I don't know. It bothered me, and I can't help but feel at least some of what was going on there was gendered. Like if Carol had been another man, would they have treated the story in the same way?
I think you're right. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. There is a slightly misogynistic element here as well, and I mean, you were right earlier as well when you said that the way Carol presents doesn't necessarily help her either. Because I don't think she's a particularly likable person, you know. But
no, that's right.
Again, it's not germane to the argument, is it?
No.
It doesn't make any difference, you know.
And I don't think it's quite morally equivalent to breeds big cats in captivity, shoots them when they no longer, you know, and then uses methamphetamine addiction to men, straight men, or you know what I mean? Like, you're absolutely
correct. But it is interesting, and I think it says a lot about the human animal. animal that people are, I think, generally more sympathetic to Joe Exotic than they probably are to Carol Baskin.
No, absolutely.
I think it does say
Absolutely.
a lot about, I don't know whether it says anything about us as animals, as the human animal, but it certainly says a lot about our cultures.
Likability is definitely overpronounced in terms of pronouncing judgment.
Yeah,
It comes down to, well, this person is charismatic and interesting, photogenic in a very, very strange way, versus someone who is not. And that likability would probably, if you were given a probably equal amount of evidence in a court of law, the jury would go on the side of the person they like more. Well, look at the 2001 election.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's what is happening here, to be honest. I do think that's what's happening here, because everything Joe Exotic did within the documentary is pretty concrete. There's fairly obvious evidence for it. What the documentary kind of tries you to lead to feel that Carol Baskin maybe or perhaps didn't do, there's nothing but speculation.
Yeah, but I think to build on James's point about likability, which is it's a strong observation. But I think as well, what I would say to add to that is it's the gendered nature of likability, and this is like well established. You know that that's traits that are considered to be admirable in men are considered, you know, very unpleasant in women.
Right.
And actually, I mean, we talk about physical appearance. I actually think that's a great example, because actually, if you look at Carol Baskin and Joe Exotic, they've clearly got the same eye makeup artist. And yet on Joe we find it charming, and on Carol we find it as yet more evidence of her crazy cat lady persona. You know, it's actually quite sinister, this stuff. You know, it really is.
What if Carol Baskin looked like, I don't know, someone who is a woman who is considered to be generally presentable? Yeah.
But what would that even look like? What could Carol Baskin look like and it not end up being a line of criticism for her? I don't think she's got. I mean, what I admire about what Carol did was she found a persona that worked for the people she wanted to reach, right? And it clearly does. She's got her social media game, she's got her videos, she's got her donations coming in, she's got her park, she's got her volunteers. She's figured out a personality type to present that gets her where she needs to be, and she doesn't care if the rest of us watching the documentary think she looks strange, because she knows who she's marketing herself to. You know what I mean? She knows who she's trying to reach. But I think that
you have to also bear in mind, within the remit of the narrative the documentary is trying to portray, she won.
100%.
She won. She wins.
There's no getting away from that. There's no getting away from that.
Absolutely wins.
And I'm glad they went. I'm glad there was. I mean, it's almost a shame that it ended where it did in terms of the documentary. That because we only got in caption, didn't we? That they'd also raided Doc's place and found the bodies. You know, because that was, we knew about that from like episode 4, right? We knew Doc was euthanizing cats as well. So, and I'm really glad that fucker went down.
Yes, he was hateful.
I despised him so much. So. And as I say, it's a shame it only happened in the kind of afterward. But you know what? The story's still going on, right? This is the amazing thing. Because Joe's apparently spilling his guts in jail, like, right now.
Yeah.
You know, so like all he of went that to Peter with the stuff. So like,
and he's also, I mean, he's not just connected to that big cat community, is he? There's lots of other things involved now. You know, there's mafioso crime drama stuff going on here. He knows a lot of shit.
Yeah,
it could be exponential, couldn't it? You could just keep spinning documentaries off of this about the various people involved.
I'm just hoping Trump ends up implicated somehow. That would feel like the ultimate justice.
It seems a long shot, but you know,
dominoes keep falling for long enough.
Stranger things have happened. I mean, the phenomena.
It's 2020. Is anything real?
Right. At this point, anything goes, doesn't it? Anything goes. Nothing would surprise anymore.
Some ocelot in some car park somewhere in a trench coat is just spilling beans to some FBI agents as we speak.
Oh man!
It's been fun seeing like the celebrity response, because there were a couple of I saw like, you know, I mean, Mike Tyson, for God's sake, coming out with a public statement apologising for having owned tigers in the 90s. Right. I mean, it's like, I think got one or two other things to apologise for in the 90s, Mike.
Right, yeah. But
it's interesting that he's worried about his image with regards to tigers right now. Right. What does that tell you about the reach of this documentary? quite extraordinary stuff.
I mean, that is another interesting element of the documentary, isn't it? It talks about big cat people, doesn't it, in very general terms, and there are various statements from various people, even those who are involved in the big cat community, who say, look, there is a certain personality type, not universally, but generally, who is attracted to owning big cats. And there's a tendency for them to be insane.
It certainly seems that way, doesn't it?
If this documentary is any measure of reality, then the big cat culture is something that I just want to look at from the outside. I never want to be anywhere near it or anywhere near anyone involved with it. But watching it from the outside is incredible.
I mean, that's where you kind of hope Carol does win, right? Because if she shuts down all the other zoos, and then her place will eventually die out when the cats die out, and then we're just done with cats in captivity in private zoos, and we can all get on with our lives. So that seems to be. Although I do wonder, I then immediately find myself worrying where those personality types will get attracted to instead. Because if they end up in politics, maybe we're better off with the big cat thing.
Or in business or something like that.
Or exactly, maybe we let the Tigers take one for the team there, I don't know.
I mean, they are politicians, and they are celebrities, and they are business people, and they're doing all this sometimes within the confines of their own private kingdoms, selfish giant style, or they do find themselves imprinting on a larger stage, and amongst other vulnerable people.
Yeah,
you could ride the big cat power trip all the way to the White House, unfortunately.
Yeah. Sure. Absolutely, sure. And because it associates you with animals, people will automatically think that you're doing something in conservationism or something that's positive, won't they? And it's just not true, is it? I mean, all the way through, Joe and various others talk about how much they love these animals, and then of course you find out that they're shooting them in the skull when they get old and burying them, you know?
But you know what? I think there's a thing there about a certain personality, and I don't want to, I'm not trying to draw a moral equivalence here, but there's a thing about the way that abusers use the word love, right? There's a way that certain abusive personalities use the word love, and what they mean by loving something is they get enjoyment from it.
Yes, and it serves their interests.
They get pleasure from it.
Yeah.
And they get pleasure from it, and that's actually, it's not. They're using the same word that we use, but it means something very different in their mouths, right? And actually, I think when Joe says he loves big cats, he's perfectly sincere about that. But I also think for Joe, that love is entirely consistent with shooting them in the back of the head when they're no
right. Yeah, it's objectified, isn't it? Basically, he sees them as objects that he can use to just exert control over other people.
It's so different with his husbands, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but it's not any. He said he loved them, but really what he meant was he gained pleasure from them.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And someone like Joe Exotic, that's what they mean. That's what relations with other. I doubt he even regards other people as living as such, or is even real in any meaningful way.
But I think it's the same for Doc, and I think it's the same for Jeff Lowe, and all of those types.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the other interesting things I did find myself getting from the documentary, though, and was I did find myself getting a sense of what they were talking about, because when there was extended footage of the animals, I felt myself starting to get an actual physiological reaction to it.
Yeah.
Like I felt my heart rate increase, and I felt like these animals are fucking amazing to look at. They really are. And you just think, like, I found myself starting to think about, like, what would their fur feel like in your hand? What would they smell like?
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? What would it feel like to actually embrace a creature that big, that powerful? And it didn't take long for me to kind of click into, like, looking at characters like Kelsey and Eric, the head keepers at his, and thinking, like, no, I think I get it.
Yeah.
I think I do kind of get why they're just like, losing a hand and back at work by the end of the week. I think I get it,
Yeah, I totally understand, like, the magic of these creatures. I think most people would, because they are magnificent, aren't they? They're just miracles of evolution and nature. They're beautiful entities, and they're exotic, they are exotic. We don't encounter them or anything like them in our day-to-day lives. So there's also the danger element, of course, which is addictive.
Yeah, and I wonder about. I just think it's really interesting that kind of baseline attraction, and what I mean. It seems to me a lot of what this is. If there is a moral to the story, I don't know, but one of the threads through it is definitely it's about the willingness of others to exploit our desires, right?
Yeah, right.
And I don't think that reaction I have to those animals is an unhealthy one. I don't think there's anything wrong, wrong in inverted commas, whatever wrong means, and how it makes me feel to see those animals. But I also know that supporting financially supporting a zookeeper like Joe Exotic to get close to them would be morally reprehensible, and so I don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm with Carol on that regard. I absolutely agree with her on that regard, that sort of petting them and passing them around as though they're dolls is awful. I think it's absolutely awful. I think it disrespects what they are,
Yeah, I mean, in a documentary not short on upsetting scenes, actually, for me, genuinely, one of the most upsetting scenes in all 7 episodes was seeing Joe hook the newborn tiger cub out from the mother who was still giving birth to cubs and pull it under through the fence. Oh my God! I mean, that really that ripped out.
By the same
really hard to take.
Sort of by the same token, one of the best scenes I found in the documentary is when the tiger bites his foot and drags him off. It's just beautiful, because what you actually see there, not only is it wonderfully karmic, but you actually see Joe Exotic come out. You see the reality come out, because he becomes vicious, he becomes cruel, he becomes spiteful. You see the real man then. That's who he really is.
Well, at the point at which he's standing on the other side of the ditch, trembling with rage, yelling, "I'm going to shoot you in the fucking face."
Yeah.
Like, everything about that is so pathetic. Because it's like, dude, the cat doesn't understand what you're fucking saying. Right.
It's you. You're an idiot. You assume too much. You assume your own control. And that's it again and again and again, isn't it? He believes that he's in control all the time. And he's just not. He's not smart enough. The man actually isn't smart enough to play the games that he sets up for himself. And then, of course, on the back of that, you have this classic narcissistic thing where he sets up this paranoid fantasy that someone puts something on his boots to make the cats attack him. It can't have been his fault, yeah?
Now that is one of the most in a series not short of exquisite, wonderful editing. I think one of the most brilliant bits of editing in the entire show is where you have Joe saying, "Oh, I think they smeared someone on my boots," or whatever, and then it cuts to Carol Baskin saying, "If they really wanted to kill him, they'd use this oil because that's what cats."
Right,
and it's just like, fucking hell. I mean, it's really, really unfair.
Yeah.
It's really, really unfair. I mean, this is we're going back to the morality of it. That's kind of a shitty thing to do.
It's basically saying, "Oh, look, Carol's thought about this."
Exactly.
Isn't it?
And it's kind of, even with the cutting, it's kind of implying that, like, if I was going to kill Joe Exotic, this is and that's not remotely fair.
Quite frankly, I mean, when you look at it contextually, I wouldn't have blamed her for thinking about various ways of killing Joe Exotic, would you? I'd have fantasized about it by that point.
Feeding him to his own tigers, yeah, probably. But I mean, that's we're talking that for me is it's an incredibly clear example of the gap between the technical storytelling genius and the immorality of this kind of show.
Of course, have you heard what's spun off the back of that?
So they're doing a series investigating the death of her second husband being missing, right?
So there's now more close focus on Carol Baskin, and it worries me. That does concern me. I mean, if they find something, if there's something corroborating, then all well and good. But it does bother me. I mean, it does feel like this woman has had a lot of focus from media and from people outside of her own life and family, through no real fault of her own.
No, I find the drawing of moral equivalence between her and the rest of the cast to be really. I mean, genuine. I hate this. I sound like a humanist fucking lefty, but it's problematic. It just is. It's problematic.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
not good.
the drawing of moral equivalence, I think, would be completely unfair. But to describe her as a moral actor, I think, would be to overstate it.
Oh, interesting. So, in what sense?
In the sense that the sanctuary that she gives to the Tigers isn't quite what she sells herself as. Perhaps I'm a victim of the well-edited documentary and the hammer with which the makers wanted to, build there. But I don't get the sense that someone who used to be into breeding cats and that kind of thing is a moral person, and I don't think that necessarily everything that she presents herself as is what comes through. But that, of course, is not something I've got any evidence for.
No, fair enough. I just, just interested in seeing, because I think that there are aspects of her. Yeah, there are aspects of the way she runs the park that I was really bothered by. I mean, as you'd expect as a trade unionist, hearing that everyone that works there is a volunteer.
Right, yeah.
That's kind of shitty.
That's was problematic.
I mean, the thing is, and that shitty behaviour completely divorced from anything else, right? Whether or not she's involved, whether or not the park as a whole is a good thing, whether or not her mission is a righteous one, that's just shitty behaviour, and you shouldn't do it. Full stop. Right? That's just exploitation.
Yeah.
And it, is that morally equivalent to, the using methamphetamines and sexual grooming? I don't think it is, but it's not good.
No.
Nor is it good. So that's there's kind of that. But I just think, I don't know. Yeah, I think for me it's my key criticism of the documentary, and it's quite a sizable one. Is I think she is. I think she's kind of monstered by the documentary in a way that her male counterparts are not. And I do think what I actually think it does is really impressively, and I don't think it did this on purpose, but I think it really does impressively draw out the gender double standard in terms of what we find charming behaviour in men and what we find charming behaviour in women.
No, I think you're right there. I think you're right. You made the point earlier that were Carol Baskin a man, perhaps the backlash against her wouldn't have been so strong,
Yeah, I think it would be very different. I think it would be very, very different.
Yeah.
And again, that's not to excuse. I mean, I found the exploitation of labour thing, as I say, that's always going to get back up.
Yeah, there are questionable things in her past, definitely. I mean, the fact that she did used to be involved directly in the same trade that she's now opposing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is one other character that we haven't spoken about at all yet, and I know we've been going a while now, and people will have places to go. What do we make of Howard Baskin? What do we make of Mr. Carol Baskin?
Oh, the husband!
I thought I found him genuinely to be the most enigmatic figure in this entire documentary.
He's kind of a nobody, isn't he? I mean, he's kind of tacked on. Yeah, he's Carol's support, isn't he? You get some very cringy moments where he's singing at her. Which I found actually quite uncomfortable in a bizarre kind of way. Maybe that's just me being a silly homosexual and being skeevy about heterosexual relationships and just sort of, don't want to think about what's going on later tonight. Maybe that's that, but he is enigmatic. Yeah, he's kind of like maybe it's the way he's portrayed in the documentary, but I just got the impression of him as just going along. It's just sort of along for the ride. Fair enough, darling.
I don't know. He seemed so interesting to me. There was a couple of. I mean, there was one almost blink and you'll miss it moment when they're showing photographs from their wedding. Do you remember this? And on one of the shots, he's wearing a cat suit and he's on his hands and knees, and she's got him on a leash.
I missed that.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that. Bloody hell! Wow.
And that's from the wedding day. So that's like, and they're on a beach somewhere, and it's like, okay.
That is
and it never gets. Yeah, and it never gets mentioned. It never comes back. But you're like,
does it not? I would have thought that would be something that would come up again and again and again in the documentary. I'm surprised that Joe Exotic and his lot didn't bring it up.
Fascinating. But, well, I mean, I suspect that the documentary makers only got it for the documentary. I suspect it wasn't in public domain.
Wow. No, I would have definitely taken note of that.
Quite extraordinary. And there's a line earlier on, a very telling line, I think, where he said, the day we got... It's actually, I think, over the same montage, he says, the day we married, I made it... I consider it to be my life's mission to make this woman happy.
Right. Yes, I remember that.
Okay. But then there are moments where he shows real steel when he's talking about the conversations he has with the lawyers, and there's that wonderful sequence where they talk about they almost come to an agreement with the payment plan for Joe Exotic, and then Jeff Lowe comes in on the call.
Yeah.
and says, and then it actually cuts to them filming Joe Exotic and Jeff Lowe filming the conversation from their end. You hear him say it, and you're just like, oh my god!
Yeah, right.
Again, it's one of those moments where you're like, how absurdly perfect is this?
Well, he does seem to have, certainly towards those latter parts where they're talking about the court case and whatnot, he does seem to have this kind of quiet grit about him, doesn't he? Where it's sort of like, he says something along the lines of, well, they thought we'd back down, and of course we weren't going to back down, and that was the end of it. You know, there doesn't seem to be much drama around the man. You know?
He just seemed really in the eye of this, in the eye of the storm of this really utterly bizarre set of stories.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because he would have come into Carol's life whilst this was going on. Whilst all this, all the stuff with her missing former husband and the stuff with Joe Exotic and all of that, all the strangeness with her. I totally understand the desire for conservationism and to help the big cats, but the way the documentary presents her domestic life, where everything is cat themed, all of that would have been going on. So he would have come into that.
Yep. I don't know. I just found him really interesting, and I felt in spite of the fact that he got a lot of screen time, I don't feel like, unlike almost everybody else, I don't feel like I really had a handle on who Howard Baskin was by the end of the show.
Maybe that was just the nature of his personality, maybe just because he's so kind of normal.
I think that's testament to his certainly the way he presented himself. Yeah. I think it's actually quite impressive to have a camera pointed at you for that long and not really give anything away.
And maybe it's just contrast. Maybe it's just that all the personalities around him are just so extreme and so bizarre that he's just kind of small potatoes. He could have turned up on screen in his cat costume with a leash on, and it probably would have made a blind bit of difference.
No, I got a Warren Buffett style feel from him. He's a businessman, and he indulges his wife's hobby. The wife's hobby being saving as many big cats as possible and destroying her rivals. Yeah. And if she'd been into buying cashmeres, he would have indulged that. That's the sense that I had.
You might be. That might be. You might. Yeah, that would explain it actually. If it's nothing more complicated than that, that certainly would explain it.
I think you may have hit the nail on the head there. Actually, I think that might be exactly what it is.
One of the things that George and I were talking about, James, where you stepped away, I just wanted to get your thoughts on it quickly. We were fascinated by Joe Exotic's presentation as an outlaw and how much he used that kind of outlaw image, tying in with the outlaw mythology of the West and the South, to mitigate the fact that he was gay, for example, the fact that he was polygamous, which ordinarily in Oklahoma would potentially cause you some problems.
Potentially.
But by presenting it as part of this outlaw package, this gun-toting, mullet-wearing, son of a bitch thing, he kind of somehow, weaponized it in a positive way, built it as part of the image. I just wonder, how did you feel about that and about that kind of, because that was very specific to Joe Exotic. The other big cat owners didn't paint themselves as, outlaw cowboys in the same way, and yet Joe used it as a way of justifying his, flagrantly illegal behavior in terms of breeding the cats by saying that, I'm an outlaw. The state shouldn't tell me I can't keep big cats, and how he used that to play on sympathy.
I think it's uniquely 21st century. I think if it had been 40 years ago, then the average bigotry of the resident of Oklahoma, nothing against that fine state or the people as it stands, would have not allowed him to centre the things that made him unique in the way that he has been able to do so. But by drawing on that distinctly American tradition, I think it does show an unusual way ahead for the gay rights movement in America.
Right.
Because I honestly don't see how, when confronted with a redneck with a gun who says, incidentally, I happen to like people who are the same gender as myself, the average cowboy nowadays doesn't just go, well, fair enough, good for you.
Right.
And there's still going to be that slight condescension, and the fact that he is an unusual person is part of that, in that it's not what people expect, so others won't be able to necessarily follow in that same direction. Jesus, who would want to be anything like Joe Exotic? but certainly the country songs as part of that image, the cowboy mythology, the guns, the explosions, the very and I'm using the phrase as someone else would rather than my own understanding of it, the redneckiness of it as something that people respond to.
Right.
I don't know if he comes from a working class background. I couldn't get a handle on there, but he definitely took on the signifiers of what it means to be working class in rural America. And he's used that as a manner to build up this persona that you can't take your eyes off. And
Yeah.
I think
And
he managed to find
actually,
power in all the things that maybe he got bullied for as a kid. And in that respect, more power to him.
yeah, and
I mean,
and actually, you just picked out, funnily enough, because I think that is the one thing in the documentary that's really powerful. It does feel like there's an overwhelming class battle going on between Carol and Joe. And I think for me personally, that kind of blinds me to a lot of Joe's faults, because my natural instinct in that is always with the underdog, right?
Right.
And it's always going to be with the quote-unquote blue-collar character over the, painfully upper-middle-class interloper who's trying to tell people how. Like, my instincts are all pulling in one direction, but of course my intellect pulls me in quite a different one.
Exactly.
In this very particular case, because Joe is clearly like he's an evil human being. So.
Right. And also, this, you have to bear in mind, this guy presents as blue-collar. For all of his faults, at one point was wielding a lot of money and a lot of collateral, this is a guy who ran for governor, and as you pointed out, Kit, he obviously didn't win, but he got a reasonable amount of the vote. He managed to get a percentage of the vote. So that whole assumption actually isn't correct, is it? It's just it's the narrative that Joe is trying to present,
No, you're right. I can hear Jack Graham angrily in my head, insisting that he's petty bourgeois and I should have no fucking sympathy whatsoever.
That's exactly what he is. He's petty bourgeois.
Pay attention to the accent and the clothing. Look at the bank balance and the business model.
Right. This is like, this is Theresa May dancing onto the stage. This is. It's like it's a Tory MP trying to talk in patois. That's exactly what it is.
But it's interesting, isn't it? How you can know. I mean, that's where I think it's useful. Like, I know I've got those prejudices. It doesn't stop me feeling them in the moment, though.
No,
I think that's quite helpful to kind of interrogate that a little bit.
And you have to bear in mind, someone like Joe Exotic, whose entire personality is based on manipulating people in exactly that way, will know that, and they will know exactly what buttons to push. If he met like any one of us face to face, he is a narcissist, and he would know. He would instinctively read you and know, right, I've got to talk to them like this, I've got to present in this way, I've got to use this language, this tone, and I will get them on side. Because they're very good at it. They are. They are amazingly charming.
At what point does the charm end? I turned to my wife at some point and mockingly said, "Oh, go on, just let him abuse all the animals he wants." But, because you just brought into his universe in that way.
Right.
Just let him carry on.
Yeah.
Let him have one tiger when he escapes that side.
But isn't it amazing? Because that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
That is exactly what happened, because most of the people in that zoo kind of knew, didn't they?
Yeah.
They knew what was happening. And yet they did let him just get away with it.
Well, I mean, for me, one of the absolutely fascinating things was that they all testified against him, and then they all do these to-camera interviews where they're clearly deeply upset about having done that. They still feel powerfully ambivalent about the whole situation, and they feel that they've betrayed him in some way, and they feel bad about it. That the guy I was talking about earlier, the Eric Cowie, the Nickelback reject. I mean, in the final episode, he gets blind drunk, and again, I actually have ethical concerns about the degree to which someone can give informed consent to be filmed when they're that drunk. Actually, I think the film is sort of skirting a line with that one personally. But that's that moment where he's just digging out all the old photos of the tigers and going through them, just weeping. Just like, this is all I ever wanted, was to be around these animals and take.
Right. He's an ex-cult member.
Yeah, and for him, I feel, because he wasn't, I mean, I don't know how involved he was in all the stuff. Who knows? Maybe he was there for the shootings. I don't know, but he came across certainly as someone for whom, like, it genuinely was just that he was just addicted to being around those animals, and he put up with, you know, years and years and years of total bullshit and hard living and hard working, because he, you know, for him it was just a privilege to be around those animals. And I can't help but feel sympathy for that, even you know, without it doesn't justify his own behavior, let alone anybody else's, but you do feel a sympathetic resonance at that point, I think, or I did anyway.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I do get the impression that he's a victim, you know? I mean, is he culpable to a certain degree? Yes, everyone involved in this is culpable to a certain degree, in that they turned blind eyes to obvious abuse. But at the same time, you have to, it's a difficult thing. You have to bear in mind, people like Joe Exotic, and not just him, but a lot of the people who were around him, they are arch manipulators. You know, you may ask yourself, how could so many people go with the Reverend Jim Jones, you know, and force feed their children poison Kool-Aid? Well, they did.
Yeah.
You know, and it happens all the time. There are many and varied cults and cult-like structures out there that inculcate people who are not in any way abnormal or in any way unusual. They are psychologically as coherent and sane as any one of us. But the people who are behind these things, they know humanity in a way that we probably never will. You know, because they define us outside of it. You know, they are other. They are, in terms of their internal lives, they are alien.
Yeah, and I mean, the ways in which Joe manipulates people is fascinating. I mean, one of the things I'd forgotten about, but there's a moment in the, you know, where he describes how their, you know, how the way he presents it is this whole situation. My mum's been driven to bankruptcy through trying to support me, right? And he's using that to play on the heartstrings, and then within like 20 minutes you discover, well, no, actually what's been happening is Joe's been signing all this shit over to her,
right? So
it's in her name rather than his, so she gets sued instead of him.
Yep.
And actually it's and she's really old and really frail and really out of it, and this is actually just elder abuse. It's just yet more exploitation.
Absolutely.
And yet in his to camera interviews he's like, they're trying to destroy my mum, you know, they're coming after my family, and it's like
yeah, but you know, inside his head that's what he would believe.
Yeah, right.
You know, he would think that's true. He would absolutely think and feel that that's true. There would not be a shred of doubt that this is because of Carol Baskin and not because of him.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to think, isn't it? It's amazing to think, because that's the way his particular personality type works. There will never be, even for the slightest thing, there will never be any self-recrimination or self-reflection. Whatever happened, whatever tragedies, whatever denigrations or disgraces, it's because of other people. There would be a conspiracy of others, you know?
I think at one point the documentary tries to push him down in the direction of some kind of regret over his treatment of animals. It's in the last episode where he's talking about the chimps being separate and also the road that he's taken. And I think it's one of those things where, as he's speaking to the camera, he's believing that this is probably true, and it's the narrative that he is telling himself. But that's not going to stop him from walking away and continuing that same cycle. It's not even going to make a dent on it.
Nope.
That's actually a really fascinating moment, as you say that, I recall. Yeah, because he kind of almost backs into it, doesn't he? But then he also denies it. He also just says, you know, what he does is he does the classic bit of whataboutism, where he says, well, on the one hand, yeah, there was this, yeah, and that was bad for 5 years, but on the other hand, you know, I got this and I did that, and
which is totally unrelated. It doesn't make any difference.
And this whole idea, like, in his mind, there's some kind of like cosmic balance to the whole thing.
Oh, I'm a serial killer who eats people, but I'm very nice to my mother.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, well, it's not germane, is it, whether you're nice to your mother? It makes no difference. But it's a classic defense. I mean, it comes up again and again and again, that kind of whataboutism.
Well, I mean, that speaks to, I don't know, maybe I'm outing myself here. I think that speaks to the kind of inherent, you know, our psyche, none of our psyches entirely add up to a coherent whole, do they? We all contain multitude to some degree or another. We all have behaviours that we've exhibited or that we think, wow, why on earth did I ever do that? You know, like,
totally.
Or, you know, moments of emotion that make us think or feel or behave a certain way, and when we come back to ourselves, like, wow, that was weird. Why did I do that?
Or stupid, or wrong, or malevolent, or wicked. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, there's I think that kind of thinking, I think what's fascinating about it is what when you see it coming out of the mouth of someone like that, it kind of for me anyway, it certainly brings me up short. Like, okay, that's why you got to interrogate the shit in yourself when you see it.
Yeah.
That's why you've got to be relentless in like not fucking giving into that kind of logic and interrogating it when you see it, because it is not right.
It's identifying when you start to self-justify, isn't it?
Yeah, because I do think everybody does it. Because I think, I mean, my basic thesis is everyone at some point in their life has done something they're ashamed of, and everyone has. One of the aspects of being a human is figuring out how you live with the things that you're ashamed of having done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the obvious mechanisms you use to try and make peace with that would be to concentrate on trying to do good things, and B, reflect on the good things that they've done as a kind of some mitigation, as some kind of like, okay, so when the cosmic ledger comes to be read on this guy, yeah, he did that shameful thing and then he did these good things. And so, you know, like, I think that's not part of his abnormal human psychology, or if it is, then I've got it as well. Maybe you wouldn't stop talking to me. Manipulative human being. I don't know. But I think that's fairly common, actually.
I think it is common, but I think one of the main differences is it's if you say, yes, I did this terrible thing, but I've also done lots of good things, and these lots of good things totally mitigate the bad. That's the real problem, rather than looking at the bad thing and the good things in isolation, you know.
And saying they're all part of it.
Right, and the only thing that can grant you forgiveness for the bad things are the people who were hurt as a result. Yeah. And yourself after the fact. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I guess what I'm saying is, like, as well, I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing in the world to allow guilt to motivate you to do good things. I think I think that's okay.
That's perfectly fine. But I also don't think that's what you're getting from Joe Exotic here. I think what you're getting is just more justification, you know, more self-justification, more distraction, more whataboutism. And that's all you'll ever get from him. That's all you'll ever get. But it does work. You know, on other people, it works very, very well, as is evident.
Yeah. It's that realization that morality is not some kind of ancient Egyptian ledger where all the feathers are weighed up on one side and then on the other. And as you say, it's the case that you saying to them, oh, I know, I'm a shitty human being, and people go, oh, well, he admits it and he knows, that must be all right now.
Right.
Apologising for being shit, or saying, yeah, I behaved that bad way for these reasons. No, it doesn't make it any better.
Right. Yeah, but, oh, man. Are you guys still reeling from it?
Yeah, a bit.
It's taken up a tiny part of my brain, and it just lives there now. Just a small section.
Right. The emotional reaction is what I'm going to take away from it more than anything, to be honest, because it did have that very profound emotional reaction for me, where it just washed over me and it almost washed away a lot of other concerns. You know, I was just fixated on this artifact, and that may not necessarily be just as a result of the documentary. It may be because of circumstance as well. You know, you know, it's. Sorry, go on.
No, James, go.
I was just going to say, a part of what makes it immortal in my thinking at the moment is the conclusion with everything just exploding. The park situation is undone entirely. It's been razed to the ground literally by Jeff Lowe and his Michael Rooker-like friend. The psychology of it has been completely done there. There's people just left reeling, and Joe Exotic himself has exploded. He's admitting the wrong that he's done by ratting out the other people that surround him. That's what you're left with, is a person who sat in a police cell slowly getting his revenge by admitting his wrongdoing. And I think it's that ending, as much as the mad personalities and behaviours that has made it stay with me.
Right. I mean, I might be wrong about this. I don't even think that he's confessing and getting time off for cooperating, because he's not even talking. I don't think he's even talking to the police. He's talking to Peter. So it really is pure vengeance.
It's spite, isn't it?
Pure spite and malice. It's quite extraordinary. Because again, it lays him bare in a way that that's not an aspect of his personality that is immediately apparent when you see him interviewed.
No.
and it is quite extraordinary the level of malice he's engaging in that final part, that final act of utter self-immolation, and it really is just like, I'm going to take you all with me.
Right.
It's narcissism right to the end.
It
but
is.
Fucking hell, it's incredible. It's so potent, and as I say, the fact that it's Peter, his sworn enemy. For the entire 7, like those are, never mind Carol Baskin, that's like the ultimate.
Yeah.
You know, because they really are explicitly against everything he stands for. They really are trying to bring him down, and he's gone to there. And I love the way the woman for Peter was like, "Yeah, we're pretty sure he's just doing this for revenge." But you know, we'll take the information and we'll put it to good use, and we'll try and secure prosecutions and so forth. Goodness me!
Wow.
I mean, it's funny you say that. I think for me, James, the thing that's going to live with me are the people. I feel like these characters are going to haunt me for quite some time.
Yeah.
I think both of Joe's husbands. I mean, we see, obviously, we spend a lot of time with John Finlay because he's still with us and was being in the.
And also, I mean,
I loved him getting his tattoo at the end as well. I have to say that was genuine, wasn't it?
Mm.
So, and the way he said, you know, that guy will just be a memory, and he said, not even that, not even that. Just that was kind of beautiful. And I mean, God, if anyone deserves a happier second act, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He felt like a fairly blameless figure in the whole thing in the grand scheme of things. And I think characters like Finn, he's going to haunt me. And I think, and Kelsey and Eric, the two keepers, and fucking Jeff Lowe and Rick Cook, fucking that guy. Christ almighty.
The fact they're still out there.
Yeah. And
you know?
What is happening with James Garretson, man? I feel like, because that guy, he's the other enigma for me. Like, who was that guy? What was he? And there was some secret filming of him, and I'm not sure who was doing the secret filming. What, you know what I mean? Like, I couldn't quite figure some of that out. And his whole thing about, like, I'm not done with the FBI yet.
Right.
You know, and all that kind of like, who? What the fuck is that?
Oh, there's more than tiger corpses buried roundabouts, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's...
Other presentational question for you, Sue. Do you think that in any way this may have been improved by a omnipresent narrator, someone taking you through the story, as opposed to the Talking Heads one there? My gut says no. I think letting people slowly let the story go out in that respect is absolutely the correct way to go. But there are moments where I think it's suffered, such as you've just drawn up, not certain where footage has come from and where. I'd like to know this was recorded here and there. You know, even a little bit of text on the bottom of the screen.
I was going to say, like a text bubble or something might have helped. But no, I think an omnipresent narrator would have sort of prejudiced it too much somehow. There is this element of these people presenting in such a manner that they hoist themselves by their own petards, you know, and that's the strength of the whole thing. It's the fact that they slowly reveal themselves without anyone presenting overt interpretation.
I think that's right. I mean, I agree that it was, I think not having an omniscient narrator was the right decision, but I think, James, you have highlighted that wasn't without cost. I think the benefits outweigh the costs personally. I think it's ultimately a stronger piece given that. But yeah, I mean, that is the one thing. Every now and then it would have been nice to have a caption card that said, you know, hidden footage shot by X or Y. Right. That would have been quite, because some of that does get quite confusing. It's almost cut together like a movie. I mean, I know we've all said, haven't we, at various points that we had to check this was real. Funnily enough, I remember I was watching it with my wife, and after the first episode, she went to try and find the website where he was selling tiger goods. Right. Because at that point, it all still seemed quite. And she was like, "Well, that looks hilarious. I wonder if you can still get them." And she was like, "No, the site's been shut down." I was like, "Yeah, I don't think we're headed for a happy ending."
No, I don't think he's still selling tiger paraphernalia. You know.
Yeah, I don't think he's still selling his tiger cosmetics. But it was, you know. But you know, because you see the website on the documentary, don't you, in the first episode? But I think that so I think, but maybe I don't know. I think the strengths of the way it's presented outweigh the costs. I wonder if I mean, maybe the thing. You know what? I'd love to see. I'd love to see a commentary track from the.
Now
from the main
that would be fascinating. That I would love to know.
Yeah.
I'd love to actually. That is one of the more interesting elements that's unspoken about the whole thing. The actual documentary creators, where are
Yes.
they coming from? What is their
yeah.
what is their angle? What is their background? You know, what is this to them? That would be interesting.
Because if I had to guess, I'd say Carol Baskin is not going to work with them on season 2. I mean, I
guess
would
not.
in her position, because
No.
I think she got hung out to dry quite badly by them, and I think she would feel aggrieved, and I think she'd have some grounds for it. But yeah, I don't know.
But there were the memes,
heard-
Kit.
oh.
There were the memes.
There were the memes.
The
That's true.
memes
God.
have come, and I'm quite pleased with the memes.
I have heard, I've not checked it out, but just maybe as an example of how this documentary has an afterlife, people making up their own rumours about things, that the man who started the documentary off is being treated for PTSD based on his experience over the last 5 years, which I find entirely believable.
Yeah.
I mean, Kit, you mentioned this wasn't going to have a happy ending. Under Joe Exotic's own maybe moral relativism, what does a happy ending look like for him? That's what I'm wondering now.
Oh, it's the survival of the survival and expansion of the kingdom, right? It's just that Carol Baskin is driven away and humiliated and ruined financially for preference, or convicted of murdering her husband. And he carries on being the king of his zoo, and maybe he runs for governor and wins next time.
Yeah, right. That's what I
down.
think. That's what I think would be heaven for Joe Exotic. It would be Joe Exotic in an office somewhere, some incredibly powerful and
cowboy
office.
boots up on the desk, smoking a cigar, and
And a new reality show around him as he does the governing.
Well,
Right.
obviously,
Right, yeah.
If not his own TV channel,
Yeah.
Anything that swells the ego, really.
Yeah.
Anything that swells the ego would be paradise for Joe Exotic.
But no, you're right. I mean, that underlines the point, doesn't it? It shows we were talking about earlier. Like there's no happy endings for this personality type. There just isn't.
No, there isn't. I mean, I don't know whether you guys have ever read any of the case studies about narcissistic personality disorder or the testimonials and accounts, but they are necessarily self-destructive.
I mean, I think, arguably the only guy who got away with it that I can immediately think of in British history was like Jimmy Savile, right?
Right.
Because he literally rode it out to the end, and it only all came out afterwards. And I mean, he doesn't give a shit, does he? He's gone.
No, exactly.
So I mean, I guess he kind of got away clean, but it's very unusual. It's very.
It is.
I believe it's real.
There's a tendency for them to sow the seeds of their own destruction because they do surround themselves with these elaborate structures of lies and exaggerations and distortions. They play other people off against one another, and eventually people realise. Eventually, something comes out that's so extreme, that's so bizarre, that people start to question, and then it all falls apart.
But there's also the addiction to swaggering around, telling everyone you're an outlaw. I mean, sooner or later, if you do that, the law's going to pay attention, surely. Yeah. I mean, you just, if you're doing all this nudge, nudge, wink, wink, look, I'm breaking the law, I'm doing what I want, I'm living, sooner or later, someone with a badge and a gun is going to come sniffing around, surely.
Well, that's the interesting thing. I mean, he is, in certain respects, insofar as like narcissistic personality disorder goes, he is slightly unusual in that they do tend to brag a little bit. They do tend to be a little larger than life, but not to that extreme.
Right.
They do tend to. They want people in the wider world to be nice to them, to basically fluff them up. So most people who encounter narcissists don't know they've encountered them. They think they've encountered someone who's really nice, who's really charming, who will do anything for them. That's really what you want to look for. Someone who nobody in the outside world has a bad word to say about.
Right. Yeah.
But within their own domestic spheres are terribly abusive, or that's what you want to look for.
So this is the thing about like the old thing about abusive people run a in-group, out-group.
Right.
And if you're in the in-group, you don't even know there is an out-group.
Exactly.
Like, genuinely, you have no idea.
Exactly that. People are always surprised.
Right.
In the same way as they are for really extreme cases like serial killers. What do people always say?
Quiet neighbour and
exactly. They were quiet. They kept themselves to themselves. They were very nice. You wouldn't have expected it of them.
Yeah.
I've just wrapped up a far lesser documentary on Netflix about the Unabomber, and it's got none of the thrill or the joy that Tiger King can bring you in its presentation. But it's exactly that. This is a man who lived in the woods, and his closest neighbours thought there's no way he's up to anything bad. Going back to what you said, Kit, about the law, I found it interesting that one of the few positive examples of traditional femininity was the lawyer that tried the case. I'm struggling to think of anyone else who would come under that breach that the documentary seemed to have no problem with, other than the lawyer.
Oh, the federal prosecutor.
Yeah,
Amanda Green. I would argue that the reporter for News 9 actually came across pretty well as well. Actually, Sylvia Corkhill. I think she was a fairly straight bat. What I found interesting about her was her willingness to talk about the way in which Joe appealed to the media. I thought that was actually quite. I admired the self-awareness of that, actually.
Yeah, she was quite brazen about it as well, wasn't she? Like, she did point out, well, yes, he made good television. That just by his very nature, you just turned the camera on him and stuff happened.
He made great television because he wouldn't shut up. You couldn't shut him up once he started talking. And what's amazing is when you see that. I mean, and again, that's where not having a narrator or something like that really helps, because of course our minds, I'm sure, immediately go to Fox and Friends, right, and Trump phoning up and the hour-long rambling conversations on Fox and Friends. I mean, that's a moment of genuine eerie resonance that a lesser skilled filmmaker would have completely fucked up, because you don't need to put your finger on that for the audience. The audience will make that connection all by themselves and have involuntary shudder. But I thought she came across fairly well, because I just felt that she played a very straight bat in terms of describing the relationship between Joe and the media and how that had played out. And she was neither apologetic nor justifying, nor attempting to justify or being grandiose about it. It was just it was very kind of.
No, she was totally neutral, wasn't she? She talked about it in technical terms.
And I kind of respected that. But yeah, the prosecutor, I agree, James, is one of the few. He just not like, okay. And that's, again, do I have conflicted feelings about federal prosecutors in general? Yes, I do. In this particular case, I think,
Yeah, right.
She did well.
I mean, I suppose, a criticism you could draw from the documentary is that the human dramas become so intense that maybe the conservationist angle gets lost, so the significance to the animals, to the abuse of the animals gets somewhat lost.
I think that's right, although I think that's why the ending of the documentary is such a masterstroke and such a gut punch.
Because it returns, doesn't it? It actually turns it back away. It turns the focus away from Joe Exotic, away from Carol Baskin, away from all of the bizarre cultural, human, political dramas that are going on, to the brute facts about tigers in the USA, about private ownership of tigers as opposed to their plight in the wild. And that's absolutely necessary, because you can just get lost down the abyss, can't you?
But I take your point, George, that does feel somewhat perfunctory, almost feels like an afterthought. It's like, oh yes, we do have to do this right here at the end.
Maybe, but for me it really landed emotionally. For me it was an absolute gut punch to get to because you've kind of been playing out the Ballad of Joe Exotic, and it has been a kind of tragedy and this pathetic thing. And then you I don't know, for me anyway, reading in black and white, he was convicted for, shooting 5 tigers in the head. It's just like, fuck.
Which, once again, seems to be the big motivating factor in actually having him convicted, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it just, for me, it was the moment where the illusion irrevocably shattered. Of any, I mean, when I say the illusion, I mean the last illusion, that being that, well, whatever else he was doing it because he gave a shit about these animals. Right. To have that kicked away in that really, tough, matter-of-fact way in the last 10 minutes, it did land for me. I mean, in doing so, I agree that it kind of highlights this hasn't been a focus for 7 episodes, even though actually at the core of this story is a huge amount of suffering of animals, and it's really not been a core focus. But that said, it did bring it back for me anyway. It brought it back at the end, and I felt that it was you know, it was quite a strong moment, actually. It was quite a sort of strong emotional, moral moment to be like, okay, yeah, this guy really is a complete fucking arsehole.
Well, hopefully, I mean, ideally, the documentary and the fact that it has become so pervasive will turn a critical eye to that whole culture. I mean,
Yeah.
for my money, it's a case of, I mean, I would be more extreme than Carol Baskin, you know, I would have the whole thing, every single one of them shut down and every single person involved retrospectively arrested, you know? I think the whole culture is appalling. The whole culture of it is appalling. But yeah, let's hope. And let's hope that, like Mike Tyson, it moves more people to shame, you know?
Yeah.
Even if
Yeah.
it is only over their public persona or their perception.
I mean, it's incredible to learn. It's one of those things that you're half aware of for the
Yeah.
majority of your adult life. That there are these private zoos where people just own the big cats.
Right.
I've now got the same manner of just sheer disbelief as I do when it comes to the American health system. What an insane black hole of lace! Like,
Right.
you know, they speak the same language as us, but don't ever think you can understand that country.
Yeah, this is it's trespassing on an alien culture, isn't it? It really
Absolutely.
is.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It does feel, and for me as well. I don't know. I mean, the parallels between what's going on in the big cat private zoo world and organised crime more generally, and indeed
Right.
the overlap.
The overlap,
Right?
yeah, right. The way these seem
Is-
to coalesce around one another, you know, very interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's really fun. And again, the organised crime thing is interesting as well, because that's the kind of thing where I think it's a similar thing where we know intellectually it exists and it's going on, but then when you're confronted with the kind of reality of it, when it's not an abstract thing, but it's personalities and it's events and it's people and it's stuff happening, it does change. It changes the nature of your understanding. It changes the nature of your relationship to the information.
I think it's when you're exposed to it outside of the realms of drama, which is where most of us encounter it, of course. And then you're actually seeing someone on screen who has killed people, you know, has tortured people, has had people killed and tortured, and is quite blasé about it. You know, they don't ever incriminate themselves, but it's fairly clear.
Well, it's that thing, isn't it, where the guy said he was present when someone was dismembered and thing, and you're just like, you know, I mean, I'm sure, James, you probably had the same reaction I did. You know, flashback to Goodfellas, like, it's really interesting how Henry Hill was right next to all these murders, but never committed. How fascinating!
Yeah, right.
That he was home and witnessed, you know, usefully witnessed the whole thing, but no participation directly.
I've always found that very interesting, that Henry Hill's experiences with him just far enough to get into the witness protection program, but not convicted.
He had a fucking tightrope to walk, though, because if he'd ever been caught out in a single lie, he'd have lost all of his witness protection. So, I mean, you know, he had to thread a needle there. But yes, fascinating. And there's similar sort of stuff, isn't there, with some of these figures where you're just like, except I think with this, I don't know, or maybe not, maybe it's the same, but certainly with Jeff Lowe and people like that, and James Garretson, you're looking at them thinking, you are not as clever as you think you are, sir. I have a very clear idea of who you are and what you're about.
Right.
And this nudge wink shit is not fucking flying at all.
It's not, is it? I mean, I think what you've got there is the ego insulating them against the perceiving that they are threatening themselves, basically. They're exposing themselves. I think they do think that they are insulated against reprisal, you know? And it's just not true. It's just not true.
No, I don't think so. I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? You wonder if they'll do a follow-up in a year's time with just all of Joe's kind of, you know, Joe's information out in the world, and because it's clearly the dominoes are clearly still falling.
Right. I mean, it would be interesting to follow up, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think there's scope for that. I mean, they're probably going to. This has been one of the biggest things. I mean, I guess I feel like I'm going to have to wrap up soon, guys.
Yeah,
so, I mean,
no,
if you
me
want
too.
to keep talking, that's
no,
fine.
I've got to go grab something to eat.
I did want to, before we close though, I did wonder I wonder how much of the reason this has become a phenomenon is because we're all just stuck at home right now. And I wonder the degree to which the sheer scale and the sheer speed that this thing has taken off and become a genuine phenomenon. I just wonder if there's any connection at all between that and the fact that we're all kind of, engaging with visual media a lot more at the moment, and with Netflix and Amazon and stuff like that, because we can't fucking go to the cinema. We can't go out. Can't do anything.
I think you're right, Kit. I think there is some that obviously plays a part in just the sheer speed with which this has just proliferated, ironically, virally, all over the internet, all over the world. That is definitely there's definitely an element of that. But I think it would have become the phenomena anyway. I think it would have caught fire.
Sure.
I mean, if you look back, we were talking about Abducted in Plain Sight earlier. It's very much an equivalent phenomena. It's not a series like Tiger King is. It's a self-contained sort of movie-length documentary, but it's a very, very similar. It has a sort of similar ethos, a similar dramatic arc, and that took off in exactly the same way, but certainly not to the same degree that Tiger King has.
I certainly wouldn't have personally probably watched Tiger King unless I'd been, scrabbling around for something to put on in between episodes of Trailer Park Boys. There's got to be some kind of meat in your sandwich. But I'm curious if there's anything that's unique to it. I mean, there's lots of 8-hour documentaries that are coming out at the moment. What is it about this story that fits in the quarantine times? What is it about these personalities that are drawing us towards it in such a big way when we're not able to leave our houses? And I think some of that does just come down to the bigness of their presentation. We're all seeking now for some kind of distraction, and when the people are going to put themselves as 7 feet tall giants, as narcissists often would, that's what I think is why this is catching on the way it is because it's car crash drama in the truest sense of the word.
It has a sort of eclipsing element, doesn't it? It allows you. It's so big, it's so extreme, it's so bizarre. It kind of eclipses everything else that's going on externally. So there is a kind of diversionary aspect to it, I suppose.
Well, even weirdly escapism. I think that's probably right. I mean, it's certainly completely absorbing. I mean, and that's everything we've already talked about how this is just an incredible piece of storytelling on an editing level, and on the decisions that were made about how to sequence the material and peel the onion, or just absolutely fan-bloody-tastic. I mean, it is a wonderful piece of filmmaking, and that would be true in normal times. But I think it feels to me it's just the reason it's gone so big so fast is just, as you say, funny enough, James, in my case, I'm doing a rewatch of Justified at the moment because I've got the box set for my birthday, and I'm finally revisiting now after a long interlude. And again, it's just having something else, having a different palette, a different flavour of thing to dip into in between. And it's been a really good kind of mid-season break for me.
I've sort of found it to be cathartic in a way, because I'm still at work. I work in social care, so I've been going out into the world doing all of that, lots of extra hours and whatnot, and then this provides a kind of, it is that collapse on the couch and Netflix thing, where you lose yourself in something totally external, totally alien, totally bizarre. It allows you to just dissolve away from reality.
Yeah, and I think, and again, we're back to that concept of just the incredible breadth of what human beings are and can be, for good and ill. I mean, just quite extraordinary. That's why I say, for me, it's the people that I'm going to be carrying around these people for a while.
Oh, these characters! I imagine if you were able to conduct a survey of fiction that's written over the next 5 or 6 years, these archetypes are going to come up quite a lot.
They're going to be all over the place. Yeah, God help us, the Tiger King fanfic is going to be.
Oh my god! Oh my god! No! No, it's going to be everywhere, isn't it? Of course it is. Of course it is. Shit. Yes, the slash fiction is going to be like that. I guarantee you. I guarantee you.
It's already there, guys. I'm telling you. It's already there. We just haven't seen it yet.
There's going to be porn films, aren't there?
Oh yeah, all parodies.
Probably been about 6 weeks away from the first Tiger King parody appearing on one of those websites. that I'm affected not to know the name of.
I understand exists somewhere on the internet. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, beyond anything else, guys, beyond anything else, ladies and gentlemen, it is a fantastic documentary. As we said earlier, be aware, it contains some very extreme situations. There's cruelty, there's animal abuse, there's human abuse aplenty, there's drug addiction, there's mutilation. There's a lot going on here, so be very, very careful. That also goes for the other documentary we mentioned, Abducted in Plain Sight. Please be very careful. Both beautiful pieces of work, well worth watching. And beyond that, guys, I think we can wrap that one up. Is there anything that you'd like to pimp out, guys?
Kit, you want to go first?
Yeah, all right. So, as usual, patreon.com, if you part with $1 a month, you get something new from me every week. It looks like new material at the moment is mainly going to be non-fiction. I've got a series of essays that I've been neglecting because I've been working on My Life in Horror Volume 1 and my novella, which is coming out, and various other bits and pieces, the short story collection. So I'm getting back to that now. So essays on Brian Keane, My Life in Horror, the final year. I'm writing those essays again at the moment. Various book reviews and essays of that kind of nature. There is some new fiction slowly creeping in though as well. And as I say, $1 a month gives you something every week. Also new audio content. Jack Graham and I are going to be recording a short series of short podcasts that will only be available at the moment via our patrons. We're rereading the entire Sherlock Holmes canon, and we're going to be recording short 30-minute to an hour conversations as each one. We've just finished reading Study in Scarlet, and we're booking in a recording session now. So,
brilliant.
That'll be one of the bonus items you'll be getting through either my or Jack's Patreon. Although I have to say, if you're going to back one patron, back Jack's rather than mine, because he's really up against it at the moment. So
links below, by the way, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Links to everything that's mentioned here. Links below.
My Life in Horror Volume 1, I haven't set the release date yet, but I've had the physical proofs through. They look gorgeous, so watch this space. I'm really excited. There's something, you can't beat it when you hold the book in your hand and you flick through and you're like, wow, this actually looks like a book. This is actually
it's a thing,
book
yes.
full of words, what I wrote, and that's a wonderful thing. Voices is available to pre-order. Voices is my short story collection of first-person narratives featuring some of the very best of my short fiction of the last 5 years and many new pieces as well. And that is coming with Black Shuck Books. So go to their website, pre-order it through them, please, because they need the direct business if you can afford it. That's available in ebook and paperback to pre-order, and they are beautiful little pocket editions, like 100-page books with I think it's 8 short stories in there, and I'm really proud of that one. It's got some really, really, really dark, nasty shit in it. So,
excellent.
Enjoy.
Well, the audience here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel will eat that up. So,
cool.
For myself, if you want to support me, I've also got a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jim Slater, and that gets you exclusive audio content. I'm doing for this year a project where there's a new short story every month, and they are all excellent. I've also got a Twitter page. You can follow me at JimCrop1916, and I do various podcasts, the main one of which is called Pex Lives, where me and my friend Kevin are going through all of classic Who in a non-linear order, but don't go look into that for Doctor Who content because there's not a lot of it, to be honest.
That sounds a lot like this podcast, doesn't it, Kit? I mean, this one was really on point.
Yeah, this is the most on topic we've been for quite some time.
I think so. Yeah,
I think James kept us honest. I mean, I still think my favourite one is our Lost Boys episodes where we talk for almost 3 hours.
About nothing to do with the Lost Boys.
And Lost Boys gets maybe 20 minutes in a minute. The rest of it is just, I don't even know what. But yeah.
Again, guys, links below. As for myself, you can find me knocking about here on the Exaggerated Elegy channel. You can find my fiction through Perpetual Motion Machine Publishing, Born in Blood Volume 1, nasty selection of short stories there. They're very nasty indeed. Go and check those out. And you can find other short stories on amazon.co.uk and at strangeplaygrounds.com. And if you want to natter, you can find me at Enigmatic Elegy on Twitter. With that, guys, I will bid you adieu. Thank you both so much for coming on.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Man. And thank you for listening, guys. Until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye bye now.
Hey.